You've been taught that control brings peace, that if you manage everything carefully, think ahead, and keep life in your hands, nothing will disturb you. But if that were true, why does the need to control make your mind more restless? Why do you feel more pressure the more you try to hold everything together? Why does peace disappear the moment you try to force life to go your way? The truth is, the need to control is the fastest way to lose peace. And Buddhist teachings reveal this with quiet clarity. For centuries, wise minds have seen that suffering begins the moment we resist what is and try to reshape reality to fit our fears. The tighter you hold on to outcomes, people, and expectations, the more your peace slips away. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to loosen. Your thoughts will slow down. The tension in your body will soften. You'll feel a quiet sense of relief, as if you no longer have to carry everything. And when you wake up tomorrow, you will see life differently, calmer, lighter, and finally at peace. This is not just something to listen to. This is something to release. Are you ready? Let's begin. Now something begins to shift. You can feel it, even if you can't explain it yet. That quiet tension you've been carrying, that constant need to stay in control, it doesn't come from strength the way you thought it did. It comes from something much deeper, something the mind has been trying to hide from you this whole time. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Because control is not just a habit, it is a defense, and like all defenses, it was built for a reason. But what once protected you may now be the very thing that keeps you trapped. There is a subtle discomfort that most people spend their entire lives trying to escape. It doesn't always appear as fear in an obvious way. It doesn't shout or panic or make a scene. It sits quietly in the background, shaping your thoughts, influencing your actions, guiding your decisions without ever announcing itself. It is the discomfort of not knowing what will happen next, not knowing how things will turn out, not knowing if you will be okay. And the mind does not like this, so it creates something to deal with it: control. Control is the mind's way of building certainty in a world that refuses to guarantee anything. It tries to create order where there is unpredictability, safety where there is risk, clarity where there is mystery. At first, this feels helpful. You think ahead so you don't get caught off guard. You analyze situations so you don't make mistakes. You prepare for outcomes so you can avoid pain. It feels like intelligence. It feels like maturity. It feels like responsibility. But slowly, without realizing it, something changes. What started as protection becomes pressure. Because now, instead of allowing life to unfold, you feel responsible for controlling it. Every outcome becomes something you must manage. Every uncertainty becomes something you must solve. Every possibility becomes something you must think through. And the mind never rests, because uncertainty never disappears. No matter how much you plan, life remains unpredictable. No matter how much you think, outcomes remain uncertain. No matter how much you prepare, the future refuses to be fully known. So the mind tries harder. It tightens its grip, it thinks more, it plans further ahead, it replays scenarios again and again, searching for a version of reality that feels safe enough to relax in. But that version never comes, and this is where suffering begins. Not because life is inherently painful, but because the mind is trying to protect itself from something it cannot eliminate: uncertainty. The deeper truth is this: control is not created because life is dangerous. It is created because the mind is uncomfortable with not knowing. And instead of learning to sit with that discomfort, it builds systems to escape it. It predicts outcomes, it rehearses conversations, it imagines scenarios. It tries to prepare for everything. But all of this activity has a hidden cost. It pulls you away from the present moment, because instead of being here, experiencing what is actually happening, your attention is constantly projected into the future or dragged back into the past. You are not living life, you are managing it. and managing life is exhausting. There is a quiet tension that builds when you live this way, a constant background pressure that never fully leaves. Even in moments that should feel peaceful, there is a part of your mind that remains alert, scanning, preparing, thinking. It feels like responsibility, but it is actually resistance. Resistance to uncertainty, resistance to not knowing, resistance to the natural flow of life. And this resistance is what creates suffering. Because the more you resist something, the more attention you give it. And the more attention you give it, the more real and overwhelming it becomes. So uncertainty, which is simply a part of life, begins to feel like a problem, something that needs to be fixed, something that needs to be controlled. But here is what the mind does not realize. The attempt to control uncertainty does not remove it, it amplifies it. Every time you try to predict what will happen, you create more possibilities to think about. Every possibility brings new questions, new concerns, new scenarios to analyze. The mind becomes a machine that produces endless what-ifs. What if this goes wrong? What if they think this? What if I make the wrong decision? What if things don't work out? And because these questions have no final answer, they keep the mind active endlessly. This is why control feels like a loop, because it is a loop that feeds itself. The more you think, the more uncertainty you notice. The more uncertainty you notice, the more you feel the need to think, and so the cycle continues. But there is something even more subtle happening beneath all of this. Control is not just about managing the external world, it is also about managing your internal experience. You try to control how you feel, you try to avoid discomfort, eliminate anxiety, fix sadness, maintain stability. But emotions do not respond well to control. They are not problems to be solved, they are experiences that move through you. And when you try to control them, you create resistance. You tell yourself you should not feel this way. You try to push the feeling away. You analyze it, judge it, fight it. And instead of passing naturally, the emotion becomes stuck, it lingers. Because it is not being allowed to complete its natural cycle. This is one of the deepest ways control creates suffering, not by creating problems, but by preventing resolution. Because resolution comes from allowing, from letting the experience unfold without interference. But control does the opposite. It interferes, it interrupts, it tries to reshape the experience into something more comfortable, and in doing so, it keeps the discomfort alive. There is also a hidden belief behind all of this, a belief that says if I can just control everything, I will finally feel at peace. But this belief is flawed, because peace does not come from controlling life, it comes from no longer needing to. And this is where the mind struggles, because letting go of control feels dangerous. It feels like you are giving up, like you are becoming passive, like things might fall apart. But this is not what is actually happening. What you are letting go of is not responsibility, you are letting go of resistance. You are letting go of the constant effort to force life into a specific shape. And when that effort drops, something unexpected happens. The tension begins to fade, not all at once, but gradually. You notice moments where your mind is quieter, moments where you are simply present without trying to manage anything, moments where you are just experiencing life as it is. And in those moments, there is peace, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being resisted. This is the shift from control to awareness, from managing to allowing, from resistance to acceptance. And it is not something you force, it is something you notice. You begin to see when the mind is trying to control. You notice the tension that comes with it. You feel the pressure, the urgency, the need to figure things out. And instead of following it, you pause. You let the thought pass. You return to the present moment again and again. This is the practice, not controlling less by force, but becoming aware of control as it happens. Because awareness itself creates space. And in that space, the need to control begins to loosen naturally. You start to trust that not everything needs to be figured out right now. You begin to see that uncertainty is not something to fear. It is something to live with, something to move through, something that gives life its depth and unpredictability. And slowly, the mind learns something new, that it does not need to protect you from uncertainty, because uncertainty is not the enemy, the resistance to it is. And when that resistance fades, peace returns, not as something you create, but as something that was always there, waiting beneath the noise. And as that resistance begins to fade, something else becomes easier to notice. The mind does not only try to control through force, it also tries to control through thinking. It moves quietly, almost invisibly, convincing you that if you can just figure things out a little more, think a little deeper, predict a little better, then you will finally feel at ease. But this is where another layer of the trap begins to reveal itself. There is a quiet pull inside the mind that keeps bringing you back into thought. Not because you need to think, but because it feels like thinking will give you relief. It feels like clarity is just one more thought away. It feels like peace is waiting on the other side of one final answer. But no matter how much you think, that final answer never arrives. There is a moment many people overlook, a moment where nothing is wrong, yet the mind refuses to be still. It searches, scans, tries to connect dots that are not even there. It creates questions where there were none, simply because it has become used to doing so. This is not curiosity, this is compulsion. It is the habit of predicting outcomes, of trying to stay ahead of life, of trying to secure a future that has not yet arrived. At first, this seems useful. You believe that thinking things through will protect you. You believe that preparing for every possibility will keep you safe. You believe that if you can just anticipate what might happen, you can avoid discomfort. But slowly, this habit turns into something else. It becomes constant. It becomes automatic. It becomes a loop that runs even when there is nothing to solve. The mind begins to treat every situation as something that must be figured out. A simple conversation becomes something to analyze. A small decision becomes something to overthink. A neutral moment becomes something to question. And without realizing it, you lose the ability to simply be. Because instead of being present, you are always leaning forward into the future, trying to see what is coming, trying to calculate what it will mean, trying to prepare for something that may never even happen. And this creates a tension that never fully leaves. It is not loud, but it is always there. A subtle tightness in the chest, a background noise in the mind, a feeling that something still needs to be resolved before you can finally relax. But there is nothing to resolve. This is the part that is difficult to accept. The mind keeps searching for answers to questions that do not need answers. It keeps trying to solve life as if it were a problem. But life is not a problem, it is an experience. And when you treat it like something that must be figured out, you turn every moment into a task. This is how the addiction forms. Not as something obvious, but as something that feels reasonable. It feels like you are being thoughtful. It feels like you are being aware. It feels like you are being careful. But underneath it, there is a dependency on thinking as a way to feel in control. And just like any dependency, it creates a cycle. You feel uncertain, so you think. The thinking gives you a temporary sense of control. That control fades, so you think again. And over time, the mind learns that thinking is the response to discomfort. So it begins to think even when there is no real discomfort. It fills silence with analysis. It fills stillness with prediction. It fills peace with unnecessary questions. And slowly, the ability to rest disappears. There is also a deeper illusion hidden inside this habit. The belief that the future can be known if you think about it enough. The belief that certainty can be reached through enough mental effort. But this belief is what keeps the loop alive, because the future is not something you can fully predict. No matter how many scenarios you run, there will always be variables you cannot account for. No matter how carefully you plan, there will always be elements outside your control. And yet, the mind continues to try, not because it is effective, but because it is familiar. It has learned to equate thinking with safety. So when you stop thinking, even for a moment, something feels off. There is a strange discomfort in stillness, a feeling that you are missing something, that you should be doing something, that you should be figuring something out. But this feeling is not a signal that something is wrong. It is a signal that the mind is used to movement. And when that movement stops, it does not know how to rest. So it tries to pull you back in. It presents new thoughts, new possibilities, new concerns. It tells you that this one is important, that this one needs your attention, and if you are not aware, you follow it, again and again. But here is the shift. You begin to notice that not every thought needs to be followed. Not every question needs to be answered. Not every possibility needs to be explored. You begin to see that thinking is not always necessary, and more importantly, you begin to see that peace is not found at the end of thinking. It is found in the absence of it. This does not mean you stop thinking completely. Thinking still has its place. It helps you plan when planning is needed. It helps you solve problems when there are real problems. But what begins to change is the relationship you have with it. You no longer use thinking as a way to escape uncertainty. You no longer rely on it to create a sense of control. You begin to allow moments where nothing needs to be figured out. And in those moments, something unexpected happens. The tension begins to dissolve. Not because you solved anything, but because you stopped trying to. There is a simplicity in this that the mind often overlooks. The idea that peace does not come from having answers, but from not needing them. That clarity does not come from thinking more, but from thinking less. And this is where the addiction begins to weaken. Because the more you experience peace without needing to predict anything, the less appealing the habit becomes. You begin to see that the mind was not solving problems, it was creating them. That the endless thinking was not protecting you, it was exhausting you. That the need to figure everything out was not bringing clarity, it was creating confusion. And slowly, you begin to let it go. Not by force, but by understanding. You allow thoughts to come and go without attaching to them. You notice the urge to predict, but you do not follow it. You feel the pull to analyze, but you let it pass. And in doing so, you create space. Space where the mind can rest. Space where awareness can return. Space where life can be experienced without interference. This is where peace begins to stabilize, not as something temporary, but as something that is always available when you stop feeding the habit of constant prediction. Because the truth is simple. You do not need to figure everything out to be okay. You do not need to predict the future to feel safe. You do not need to control what is coming next to experience peace right now. And when this becomes clear, the mind begins to settle, not because it has found answers, but because it has stopped searching for them. And in that stillness, there is a quiet kind of freedom, a freedom that was never created by control, but was always hidden beneath it, waiting for you to stop trying so you could finally rest. And as the mind begins to slow down, as you start to see that not every thought needs your attention, something deeper begins to reveal itself. It is not just that the mind thinks too much, it is why it thinks the way it does. Because hidden beneath all that effort to predict, to analyze, to figure things out, there is something the mind has been protecting all along. And once you see it, everything changes. There is a quiet truth that most people are not ready to face. The thoughts you trust the most are not always coming from clarity. They are often coming from fear, but not the kind of fear that is obvious, not the kind that makes your heart race or your body tense. This fear is subtle, it is calm, it is convincing. It speaks in a voice that sounds reasonable, logical, even intelligent. It tells you to think things through. It tells you to be careful. It tells you to consider every outcome. It tells you that you are just being wise, and so you listen, because it sounds like intelligence, but beneath that voice there is something else, a quiet unease that is driving the need to think, a discomfort that is pushing the mind to stay active, a sense that something could go wrong and that you need to be ready. This is fear wearing the mask of intelligence, and it is one of the most powerful patterns in the mind because it is so easy to trust. You begin to believe that your overthinking is a strength, that your ability to analyze everything is what keeps you safe, that your constant awareness of possibilities is what makes you prepared. But if that were true, your mind would feel calm. Instead, it feels tight, it feels restless, it feels like it cannot stop. Because fear does not create peace, no matter how intelligent it sounds. It creates movement, constant movement. It keeps the mind searching, scanning, questioning, trying to stay ahead of something that never fully appears. And the more you follow it, the more convincing it becomes. You start to see patterns everywhere. You start to anticipate problems before they exist. You start to treat every situation as something that must be carefully navigated. And slowly, life stops feeling natural. It starts to feel like something you must manage, something you must get right, something you must not mess up. But here is the deeper problem. When fear disguises itself as intelligence, it becomes very difficult to let go of, because you do not see it as something harmful. You see it as something valuable. You think it is helping you. You think it is guiding you. You think it is protecting you. But all it is doing is keeping you in a state of subtle tension. There is a difference between clarity and overthinking. Clarity is simple. It feels light. It does not need to prove itself. It arrives without effort. Overthinking is heavy. It feels urgent. It repeats itself. It tries to convince you that you need to keep going. And the more you look at it closely, the more you begin to see the difference. Clarity does not argue. Fear does. Clarity does not rush. Fear pushes. Clarity does not create endless scenarios. Fear builds them constantly. But because fear speaks in a logical tone, it is easy to mistake it for wisdom. This is why the mind stays trapped, not because it wants to suffer, but because it believes it is doing the right thing. It believes that thinking more will solve the discomfort. It believes that analyzing deeper will bring certainty. It believes that staying alert will prevent pain. But none of these beliefs hold, because the discomfort does not come from a lack of thinking. It comes from the fear that thinking is trying to escape. And as long as that fear is not seen clearly, the thinking continues. There is also something else happening beneath this pattern. A need to feel in control. When the mind feels uncertain, it reaches for thoughts as a way to stabilize itself. It tries to create a sense of order. It tries to make sense of everything. It tries to build a structure that feels safe. But this structure is fragile, because it is built on assumptions about what might happen, assumptions about what things mean, assumptions about what could go wrong. And because these assumptions are not real, they require constant maintenance. You have to keep thinking, you have to keep checking, you have to keep analyzing, because the moment you stop, the sense of control fades, and the fear returns. So the mind continues the cycle, not because it works, but because it feels necessary. There is a moment where this becomes visible, a moment where you catch yourself thinking, not because you need to, but because you feel like you have to. A moment where you notice that the thoughts are not bringing clarity. They are creating more confusion. A moment where you see that the thinking is not ending, it is multiplying. And in that moment, something opens. Because you begin to question the process itself. You begin to ask, what if this is not intelligence? What if this is fear? What if all this effort to figure things out is not making me wiser, but more trapped? And this question changes everything, because once you see the fear behind the thinking, it loses its authority. It no longer feels like something you must follow. It becomes something you can observe. And observation creates distance, distance from the thought, distance from the urgency, distance from the need to control. You begin to notice the tone of your thoughts. You begin to feel the tension behind them. You begin to recognize the pattern. And instead of automatically engaging, you pause. Not to suppress the thought, not to fight it, but to see it clearly, to recognize that it is not truth. It is a reaction, a response to discomfort, a movement of fear trying to protect itself. And when you see it this way, something softens, the grip loosens, the urgency fades, because you are no longer convinced that you need to follow every thought to stay safe. You begin to trust something deeper, not the thinking mind, but the awareness behind it, the part of you that can see without reacting, that can notice without needing to fix, that can remain present without needing to control. And this is where real intelligence begins. Not in the ability to think more, but in the ability to see clearly, to recognize when the mind is being driven by fear, to understand when thinking is helpful and when it is unnecessary, to allow thoughts to come and go without becoming attached to them. This kind of intelligence does not create tension. It creates space. It allows life to unfold without constant interference. It allows decisions to arise naturally without force. It allows you to respond rather than react. And most importantly, it allows peace to return. Not because everything is certain, but because you are no longer trying to make it so. You begin to see that you do not need to think your way into safety. You do not need to analyze your way into peace. You do not need to control every outcome to feel okay. Because the safety you were looking for was never in the future. It was in your ability to remain present, to allow life as it is, to trust that not everything needs to be solved. And as this understanding deepens, the mind begins to change. Not through force, but through clarity. The habit of overthinking begins to weaken, not because you stopped thinking, but because you stopped believing every thought. The fear behind the thinking begins to dissolve. Not because you fought it, but because you saw it. And in that seeing, there is freedom. A freedom that does not come from control. A freedom that does not depend on outcomes. A freedom that exists in the absence of unnecessary thinking. And in that space, something very simple becomes clear. You were never meant to carry the weight of figuring everything out. You were never meant to control life to feel safe. You were only meant to be here, aware, present, at peace. And the moment you stop mistaking fear for intelligence, the moment you stop following every thought as if it were truth, you begin to return to that state, not by adding anything, but by letting go of what was never needed. And in that letting go, the mind finally finds what it was searching for all along: stillness. And as that stillness begins to settle in, as you start to see that not every thought deserves your trust, something even deeper begins to surface. It is no longer just about fear hiding behind intelligence. There is another force quietly shaping the way you experience life, something that does not only think, but demands. Something that does not only react, but insists that things should be a certain way. And once you notice it, you begin to understand why letting go feels so difficult. There is a silent script running in the background of your life. It does not announce itself, but it influences everything. It tells you how things should go, how people should act, how you should be treated, how your life should unfold. It creates an image of what is right, what is fair, what is expected. And without realizing it, you begin to measure reality against that script. When things match it, you feel comfortable. When things follow the plan, you feel secure. When people behave as expected, you feel at ease. But when life moves in a different direction, something inside you resists. There is a tightening, a frustration, a sense that something is wrong. Not necessarily because the situation itself is harmful, but because it does not match the story you were holding on to. This is the ego's need to author reality. It is the part of the mind that wants to be in control of how life unfolds. It wants to write the script and then watch it play out exactly as planned. It wants consistency, predictability, alignment with its expectations. And when life does not follow that script, it feels threatened. Not because life is dangerous, but because the ego's sense of identity is tied to that script. The ego is not just about who you are. It is about the story you tell yourself about who you are. It is the image you hold of yourself, the roles you believe you must fulfill, the expectations you carry about how your life should look. And this image becomes something you protect. You want to be seen in a certain way. You want things to happen in a certain order. You want your efforts to lead to specific results. And when reality does not cooperate, the ego reacts. It judges. It resists. It tries to correct what is happening. Because to the ego, anything unscripted feels like a loss of control. But life does not follow scripts. It moves. It changes. It unfolds in ways that cannot always be predicted. And the more tightly you hold on to your expectations, the more friction you create with reality. This friction is what you feel as stress. It is not just the situation itself that causes discomfort. It is the gap between what is happening and what you believe should be happening. That gap creates tension, a quiet inner struggle where the mind tries to reshape reality instead of accepting it. You begin to notice this in small moments. A conversation does not go the way you expected, and you replay it in your mind. A plan falls apart, and you feel frustrated even though nothing serious has happened. Someone responds differently than you imagined, and you start questioning everything. In each of these moments, the ego is trying to pull reality back into its script. It is trying to restore a sense of order, but this effort is endless. Because reality is not fixed, it is alive, and anything that is alive cannot be fully controlled. The ego does not like this. It prefers certainty. It prefers predictability. It prefers knowing what comes next. So it builds expectations, not just about the future, but about everything. How people should behave, how situations should unfold, how emotions should feel, how progress should look. And these expectations become invisible rules, rules that reality never agreed to. So when those rules are broken, the ego reacts as if something has gone wrong, even when nothing has. This is one of the deepest sources of suffering, not the events themselves, but the insistence that they should be different. There is also a subtle attachment hidden in this process, an attachment to identity. You do not just want things to go a certain way, you want them to confirm who you believe you are. You want your efforts to validate your worth. You want your plans to reflect your control. You want your outcomes to match your expectations. And when they do not, it feels personal. It feels like something about you is being challenged. But what is actually being challenged is not your true self. It is the image you have created, the version of yourself that depends on things going a certain way. And when that image is threatened, the ego resists. It tries to fix. It tries to adjust. It tries to regain control. But this only deepens the struggle. Because the more you try to force reality to match your identity, the more tension you create. There is a different way of seeing this, a way that does not require you to give up action, but changes the relationship you have with it. You begin to notice that the script you are holding onto is not reality. It is a mental construction, a story, a set of expectations that you have created over time. And like all stories, it can be released, not by rejecting it, but by seeing it for what it is. You begin to see that life does not need to follow your script for you to be okay, that your identity does not need to be confirmed by outcomes, that your sense of self does not depend on how things unfold. And this creates space. Space between what is happening and the need to control it. Space between the experience and the reaction. Space where acceptance can arise. This acceptance is not passive. It is not giving up. It is seeing clearly. seeing that reality is already complete as it is, even if it does not match your expectations. Seeing that your role is not to force it into a specific shape, but to move with it, to respond, not resist, to engage, not control. There is a lightness that comes with this shift, because you are no longer carrying the burden of making everything go according to plan. You are no longer measuring every moment against a script. You are no longer trying to correct what is simply unfolding. You begin to experience life directly, without the filter of expectation, without the pressure of needing things to be different, without the constant adjustment of trying to align reality with your ideas. And in that direct experience, something changes. You become more present, more open, more at ease, because you are no longer fighting what is. There is also a deeper trust that begins to form, not a blind belief that everything will go your way, but a quiet understanding that you can handle whatever arises, that you do not need to pre-write every outcome to feel safe, that you do not need to control every detail to be at peace. This trust does not come from certainty. It comes from letting go of the need for it, from realizing that life has always been unfolding with or without your control, from seeing that the more you allow it, the more natural everything feels. The ego will still try to return, it will still create expectations, it will still build scripts, but now you can see it. You can notice when it is happening. You can feel the tension that comes with it, and instead of following it, you can pause. You can return to what is actually here, to the present moment, to the experience as it is. And in that return, the need to control begins to dissolve, not because you forced it to, but because you no longer believe in it the same way. You begin to understand something very simple, yet very powerful. Life does not need to follow your script for you to find peace. Peace is found when you stop trying to rewrite what is already happening, when you stop insisting that things should be different, when you allow reality to unfold without resistance. And in that allowance, something opens, a quiet sense of freedom, a feeling of lightness, a deep, steady calm that does not depend on outcomes, because it is not coming from control, it is coming from acceptance, from letting life be what it is, and trusting that you do not need to author every moment to be okay, that you can simply be here, aware, present, at peace. And as that grip on how life should unfold begins to loosen, another layer quietly reveals itself. It is not only reality you have been trying to control, it is people, their reactions, their words, their feelings, even their opinions about you. And when this becomes clear, you start to notice something you may have missed for a long time. The exhaustion you feel is not just from life, it is from trying to manage minds that were never yours to control. There is a silent pressure that appears in the presence of others. It does not always look like effort, but it feels like tension. A need to say the right thing, to act the right way, to avoid being misunderstood, to keep the interaction smooth. Beneath all of this, there is a quiet attempt to shape how others see you and how they respond to you. And this attempt slowly turns into a habit. You begin to monitor your words before you speak. You adjust your tone depending on who you are talking to. You think about how something might be received before you express it. You replay conversations after they end, wondering if you said too much or not enough. And without realizing it, your attention shifts away from being present to managing perception. This creates a kind of invisible workload, because now every interaction is not just an experience, it is something you must navigate carefully. You are not only listening, you are calculating. You are not only speaking, you are anticipating. You are not only relating, you are controlling. And this takes energy, a lot of it. It is a form of effort that most people never question because it feels normal. It feels like social awareness, like emotional intelligence, like maturity. But there is a difference between being aware and trying to control. Awareness allows space. Control tightens it. The moment you feel like you must manage how someone else thinks or feels, tension begins, because other people are unpredictable. They have their own thoughts, their own emotions, their own perspectives that you cannot fully access or direct. No matter how carefully you choose your words, no matter how much you try to guide the interaction, there will always be elements outside your control. And yet the mind keeps trying. It tries to prevent misunderstandings. It tries to avoid conflict. It tries to create approval. It tries to maintain harmony. But this effort comes with a hidden cost. You begin to lose yourself in the process, because instead of expressing what is true for you, you start expressing what feels safe. Instead of responding naturally, you respond strategically. Instead of being present, you are constantly thinking ahead. And over time, this creates a disconnection, not just from others, but from yourself, because you are no longer acting from a place of authenticity. You are acting from a place of control. There is also a deeper fear beneath this pattern. The fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of losing connection. And the mind tries to protect you from this by managing how others perceive you. It tells you to be careful. It tells you to adjust. It tells you to avoid saying something that could create distance. But this protection is not as helpful as it seems, because the more you try to control how others see you, the more you become dependent on their response. Your peace becomes tied to their reaction. If they respond well, you feel at ease. If they respond negatively, you feel unsettled. And this creates instability, because you are placing your sense of calm in something that is constantly changing, other people's minds. This is one of the most exhausting forms of control, not because it is intense, but because it is continuous. It runs in the background of your interactions, quietly draining your energy. You may not notice it in a single moment, but over time, it accumulates. It shows up as mental fatigue after conversations. It shows up as overthinking after social situations. It shows up as a constant need to check and adjust. And slowly, you begin to feel tired without knowing exactly why. There is also a subtle assumption hidden in this behavior. The assumption that if you can just say or do the right things, you can control how others respond. But this assumption is not true, because people do not respond only to what you say. They respond based on their own internal world, their beliefs, their experiences, their emotions, their current state of mind. You can speak clearly and still be misunderstood. You can act with kindness and still be judged. You can do everything right and still receive an unexpected reaction, and when this happens, the mind tries to fix it. It replays the moment. It analyzes what went wrong. It looks for a better way to handle it next time. But this keeps the cycle going because it reinforces the belief that you are responsible for how others respond. And this is where the weight becomes heavy. You start carrying reactions that were never yours to carry. You start taking responsibility for interpretations you cannot control. You start adjusting yourself to fit expectations that are constantly shifting. And this creates a quiet pressure that follows you into every interaction. There is a shift that changes everything. It begins with a simple recognition. You are not responsible for how others think. You are not responsible for how others feel. You are not responsible for how others respond. You are responsible for your intention, your presence, your clarity. But beyond that, the rest belongs to them. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop controlling. There is a difference. Caring allows connection. Control creates tension. When you care, you listen, you express, you engage. When you control, you adjust, you calculate, you hold back. And in that holding back, something is lost. The natural flow of interaction, the authenticity of expression, the ease of simply being with another person. When you release the need to manage others, something begins to open. You feel lighter, because you are no longer carrying the weight of their reactions. You speak more freely because you are no longer filtering every word through fear. You listen more deeply, because your attention is no longer divided between presence and prediction. And something surprising happens. Your relationships become more genuine, not because you are trying harder, but because you are trying less. Less to control, less to manage, less to shape outcomes, and more to simply be present. There is also a deeper trust that begins to form, a trust that you do not need to control how others see you to be okay, a trust that misunderstandings can happen and still be resolved, a trust that connection does not come from perfection, but from authenticity. And this trust removes the pressure, because you are no longer trying to create a perfect interaction. You are allowing a real one. There will still be moments where the mind tries to step in. Moments where it wants to analyze, to adjust, to control. But now you can see it. You can notice the tension. You can feel the urge to manage. And instead of following it, you pause. You return to the present. You allow the interaction to unfold naturally. And in that allowance, something changes. The anxiety begins to fade. Not because people have become predictable, but because you are no longer trying to make them so. You begin to experience interactions as they are, not as something to be controlled. And this creates a sense of ease, a quiet confidence that does not depend on how others respond, because it is rooted in something deeper, your ability to remain present, to remain authentic, to remain at peace, regardless of external reactions. This is where freedom begins, not in controlling others, but in releasing the need to, not in managing every interaction, but in allowing them to unfold, not in securing perfect responses, but in accepting that you do not need them to be okay. And as this understanding deepens, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time: relief. A release from the constant effort of trying to shape how others think and feel. A return to simplicity, to presence, to being. And in that space, relationships stop being a source of tension and start becoming what they were always meant to be: a shared experience, uncontrolled, unscripted, alive. And in that aliveness, there is peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being forced. And for the first time, you realize that you were never meant to carry the weight of other people's minds. You were only meant to meet them as you are, in this moment, nothing more, nothing less. And as that weight of managing other people begins to fall away, something even more subtle comes into focus. It is not only what happens during conversations, it is what happens before they even begin. The quiet rehearsals, the silent planning, the need to get every word right before it is spoken. And when you start to notice this, you realize that disconnection does not start when you speak. It starts long before. There is a moment that happens before every conversation, and most people never see it clearly. A moment where the mind steps in and begins to prepare. It runs through possible responses. It predicts reactions, it adjusts sentences, it edits tone. It tries to shape the future interaction before it even exists. And at first, this feels helpful. It feels like you are being thoughtful, like you are preparing to communicate well, like you are making sure things go smoothly. But beneath this preparation, there is something else moving. A quiet discomfort with uncertainty. A subtle fear of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, of not being accepted. And the mind responds by trying to control the conversation before it happens. It creates versions of what you might say. It imagines how the other person might respond. It adjusts again and again, searching for the perfect outcome. But there is no perfect outcome, because conversations are not fixed events. They are alive. They move, they shift, they respond to the present moment. And when you try to script them in advance, you disconnect from that aliveness. You enter the interaction with a plan instead of presence. And this creates a subtle distance. Instead of listening fully, part of your attention is on what you prepared. Instead of responding naturally, you compare what is happening to what you expected. Instead of being engaged, you are managing the conversation from inside your head. This is where the disconnection begins. Not because you are not present at all, but because your presence is divided. One part of you is here, the other part is following a script, and this division creates tension. Because real connection requires full attention. It requires you to listen without already knowing what you will say next. It requires you to respond based on what is actually happening, not what you imagined would happen. But when the mind is pre-editing, it cannot fully do this. It is always slightly ahead of the moment, trying to stay in control. There is also a hidden expectation behind this habit. The belief that if you can just say things the right way, you can control how the conversation unfolds. That you can guide the outcome by carefully choosing your words in advance. That you can avoid discomfort by preparing enough. But this belief creates pressure, because now every word feels important. Every sentence feels like it must be right. Every interaction becomes something you need to manage. And this pressure makes it harder to speak freely. You hesitate, you second guess, you filter, and slowly your natural expression becomes restricted. Not because you lack the ability to communicate, but because you are trying too hard to control how you communicate. There is also something else that happens when you rehearse conversations in your mind. You begin to live them before they happen. You go through the interaction again and again, experiencing different versions of it, reacting to imagined responses, adjusting your approach. And this creates emotional involvement in something that is not real. You feel tension from conversations that have not occurred. You feel relief from outcomes that may never happen. You invest energy into scenarios that exist only in thought. And by the time the real conversation arrives, your mind is already tired, already engaged, already influenced by expectations. This makes it harder to be present, because you are not entering the conversation fresh. You are entering it with a history of imagined experiences. And this shapes how you respond. You may react to something that was never actually said. You may interpret a tone based on your expectations rather than reality. You may feel tension because your script is not being followed, and this creates confusion. Because the real interaction does not match the imagined one. And instead of adjusting naturally, the mind tries to pull the conversation back into its script. It tries to correct. It tries to steer. It tries to regain control. But this only deepens the disconnection. Because now you are not just pre-editing before the conversation, you are trying to edit it as it happens. And this creates a constant effort, a constant monitoring of what is being said, how it is being said, how it is being received. And this effort takes you further away from presence. There is a different way of experiencing conversations, one that does not require preparation in the same way. It begins with trust. Not trust in the outcome, but trust in your ability to respond. Trust that you do not need to know exactly what to say in advance. Trust that clarity can arise in the moment. Trust that you can listen, feel, and respond naturally without needing a script. This trust changes everything, because it removes the pressure. You no longer feel the need to get everything right before speaking. You no longer feel the need to predict how things will unfold. You allow the conversation to be what it is, unscripted, uncontrolled, alive, and in this aliveness, something opens. You listen more deeply. Because your attention is not divided. You respond more naturally. Because you are not filtering your words through pre-planned ideas. You connect more fully, because you are actually present. There is also a lightness that comes with this shift, because you are no longer carrying the weight of preparation. You are no longer managing multiple versions of the conversation in your mind. You are simply there, with the other person, in the moment, and this simplicity creates ease. a sense that you do not need to perform, that you do not need to control how you are perceived, that you can just be. There will still be moments where the mind tries to return to its habit, moments where it begins to rehearse again, to plan, to edit. But now you can see it. You can notice the urge. You can feel the tension behind it. And instead of following it, you pause. You let the thoughts pass. You return to the present. Again and again. This is the practice. Not forcing yourself to stop thinking, but recognizing when thinking is unnecessary. Recognizing when it is pulling you away from the moment, and gently bringing your attention back. Over time, this changes your relationship with communication. You stop seeing conversations as something to control. You start experiencing them as something to participate in, a shared flow, a dynamic exchange, something that cannot be fully predicted but can be fully experienced. And this creates a deeper kind of confidence. Not the confidence of having everything planned, but the confidence of knowing you can handle whatever arises. That you do not need to prepare every word to communicate effectively. That you do not need to control every response to stay grounded. That you can remain present, even in uncertainty. This presence is what creates real connection, because it allows you to meet the other person as they are, not as you expected them to be, not as you imagined they would respond, but as they are, in that moment. And when you meet someone in that way, something genuine happens, something that cannot be scripted, something that cannot be controlled, something that can only arise from presence. This is where communication becomes effortless. Not because there is no thinking, but because there is no unnecessary thinking. Not because everything is predictable, but because you are no longer trying to make it so. And in that effortlessness, there is peace. A quiet ease that comes from letting go of the need to pre-edit, to rehearse, to control. A return to something simple, to being here, to listening, to responding, without the weight of trying to get it right. And in that simplicity, you begin to see something clearly. You were never meant to control conversations. You were meant to be part of them, fully, naturally, present. And when you allow that, the disconnection fades. The tension dissolves, and what remains is something real, something alive, something peaceful. And as you begin to let go of rehearsing every word, as you allow conversations to unfold without trying to control them, something deeper starts to come into view. It is not only about control in moments of interaction. It is about a belief that has been guiding you for a long time. A belief so quiet you rarely question it. The belief that if you can just control things enough, you can protect yourself from pain. And when this belief is seen clearly, something inside you begins to shift. There is a promise the mind makes that sounds comforting at first. It tells you that if you plan carefully, think ahead, manage outcomes, and stay in control, you will avoid suffering. It tells you that pain comes from things going wrong, and if you can just prevent things from going wrong, you will be safe. This idea feels logical. It feels like common sense. It feels like the smart way to live. But look closely, and you begin to notice something. The more you try to control outcomes, the more sensitive you become to anything that threatens them. The more you invest in a specific result, the more fragile your peace becomes. The more you depend on things going a certain way, the more vulnerable you are to disappointment. Control does not remove pain. It increases your exposure to it, because now your emotional state is tied to outcomes that are never fully in your hands. When things go according to plan, you feel relief. When they don't, you feel tension, and this creates a constant swing, a movement between temporary comfort and recurring discomfort. But beneath that movement, there is something deeper, a fear of losing control, a fear that if you let go, something will go wrong, and this fear drives the need to hold on even tighter. You begin to notice this in everyday situations. You want a conversation to go well, so you try to control how it unfolds. You want a decision to lead to a good outcome, so you overanalyze every option. You want a relationship to remain stable, so you try to manage how the other person feels. In each case, the intention is the same, to avoid pain. But the result is the opposite, because the more you try to control, the more pressure you create. You become tense before things even happen. You feel anxious about outcomes that have not yet arrived. You experience stress in anticipation of possible discomfort. And this means you are already suffering even before anything goes wrong. This is one of the most overlooked truths. The attempt to avoid pain creates it in advance. You begin to carry emotional weight for events that have not happened. You begin to feel disappointment before any real loss. You begin to react to imagined outcomes as if they were real. And this creates a constant background tension, a sense that something is always at risk. Something always needs to be protected. Something always needs to be controlled. But there is something even more subtle happening. The more you try to avoid pain, the less able you become to handle it. Because you are no longer allowing yourself to experience discomfort naturally. You are trying to eliminate it, and in doing so, you weaken your ability to move through it. Pain is not something that stays forever. It moves, it rises, peaks, and passes. But when you resist it, when you try to control it, when you refuse to allow it, it lingers. It becomes stuck, not because it is permanent, but because it is being held in place by resistance. This is why control amplifies suffering, not by creating pain, but by preventing its natural release. There is also an attachment that forms when you try to control outcomes, an attachment to how things should be. You create expectations about how events should unfold, how people should act, how situations should resolve. And these expectations become emotional investments. You begin to depend on them. You begin to feel that your well-being is tied to them. So when reality moves in a different direction, it feels like something has been taken from you, even if nothing has actually been lost. It is the gap between expectation and reality that creates the pain. And the tighter the expectation, the wider that gap becomes. Control strengthens this attachment, because it makes you believe that the outcome can be secured, that if you do everything right, things will go your way, that if you try hard enough, you can prevent anything unwanted. But life does not operate on guarantees. It unfolds, it changes, it moves in ways that cannot be fully predicted. And when you try to force it into certainty, you create conflict. A conflict between what is happening and what you believe should be happening. And that conflict is felt as emotional suffering. There is a moment where this becomes clear. A moment where you notice that the pain you feel is not just from the situation itself. It is from the resistance to it, from the refusal to accept what is happening, from the effort to make it different. And in that moment, something opens. Because you begin to see that pain and suffering are not the same. Pain is a natural part of life. Suffering is the result of resisting that pain. And control is one of the main forms of resistance. It is the mind saying, this should not be happening. This should be different. I need to fix this. I need to change this. But what if, instead of trying to control the experience, you allowed it? Not as a way of giving up, but as a way of seeing clearly. Allowing does not mean you like what is happening. It means you stop fighting the fact that it is happening. And when you stop fighting, something shifts. The tension begins to ease. The emotional charge begins to soften. The experience begins to move, because it is no longer being held in place by resistance. There is a quiet strength in this. A strength that does not come from controlling outcomes, but from being able to meet whatever arises, to feel without collapsing, to experience without resisting, to move through life without needing it to be different in order to be okay. This strength is not built by avoiding pain. It is built by allowing it, by seeing that discomfort does not destroy you, by realizing that you can experience difficult moments and still remain present. And when this becomes clear, the need to control begins to fade. Not because you forced it to, but because you no longer believe in it the same way. You begin to trust something deeper. Not the outcome, but your ability to meet it. Not the future, but your presence within it. Not control, but awareness. And this trust changes your relationship with life. You still take action. You still make decisions. You still care about what happens. But you are no longer attached in the same way. You are no longer holding on tightly to specific results. You are no longer trying to eliminate uncertainty. You are allowing space for life to unfold. And in that space, something new appears. A sense of ease, a quiet calm that does not depend on things going your way. A freedom from the constant pressure to control, because you are no longer trying to protect yourself from every possible discomfort. You are open to the full experience of life. There will still be moments of pain. That does not change, but those moments will move differently. They will not be amplified by resistance. They will not be prolonged by control. They will be felt, understood, and released. And this creates a deeper kind of peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything being perfect, but a steady peace that remains even when things are not. Because it is not built on control, it is built on acceptance, on presence, on the understanding that life does not need to be controlled to be lived. And as this understanding settles in, you begin to feel something that control could never give you. Relief. A release from the constant effort to prevent pain. A freedom from the need to secure outcomes. A return to a state where you can simply be. Not because everything is certain, but because you no longer need it to be. And in that letting go, something becomes clear. The pain you were trying to avoid was never as heavy as the effort you used to escape it. And the moment you stop trying to control it, the moment you allow life as it is, the weight begins to lift. Not all at once, but steadily, until what remains is something simple, a quiet presence, a steady awareness, a peace that was never created by control, but was always hidden beneath it. And as that relief begins to settle, as you start to feel what it means to stop fighting every moment, something else quietly comes into view. It is not only the need to control that creates tension, it is what you are holding on to underneath that control. The expectations, the specific outcomes you believe must happen for you to feel okay. And when you begin to see this clearly, you realize that peace has never been blocked by life itself, but by the way you insist it should unfold. There is a quiet pull in the mind that reaches toward the future and fixes itself to a result, a way things should go, a version of events that feels right, safe, complete. You may not always say it out loud, but it is there. You want the conversation to end a certain way. You want the opportunity to work out. You want the relationship to grow in a specific direction. You want your effort to lead to a clear reward. This is attachment to outcomes. It does not always feel intense. Sometimes it is subtle, almost invisible, but it shapes how you experience everything. Because once the mind attaches to a result, it begins to measure reality against it. If things move toward that result, you feel relief. If things move away from it, you feel tension. And just like that, your peace becomes conditional, dependent on something that has not yet happened, dependent on something you cannot fully control. This is where the struggle begins, not in the event itself, but in the comparison between what is happening and what you believe should happen. This comparison creates a gap, and in that gap there is pressure, a quiet sense that something is off, that something needs to be corrected, that things are not as they should be. But the deeper truth is this: reality is not failing to meet your expectations. Your expectations are failing to meet reality. And the more rigid those expectations are, the more friction you create, because life does not follow fixed paths. It shifts, it responds, it unfolds in ways that are not always predictable. And when you hold tightly to a specific outcome, you lose the ability to move with that unfolding. You resist, you push, You try to force things back into alignment with your expectations, but this only increases tension. Because you are working against something that is already happening. There is also something else that happens when you become attached to outcomes. You narrow your experience. Your attention becomes focused on reaching a specific point, and everything else becomes secondary. You stop noticing what is here. You stop engaging with the present moment. You stop seeing possibilities that do not match your expectation, because your mind is locked onto one direction, and this creates a kind of blindness. Not a physical blindness, but a mental one. A filtering of reality where only certain outcomes are considered valid. But life is not limited to those outcomes. There are possibilities you cannot predict. There are paths you cannot see. There are experiences that do not match your plan, but still carry value. And when you are attached, you miss them, because you are too focused on what should happen to notice what is happening. This is where openness begins to reveal its importance. Openness is not about having no preferences. It is about not being controlled by them. It is the ability to move through life without needing it to fit a specific mold. It is the willingness to experience what arises without immediately judging it as right or wrong. And this changes everything. Because when you are open, your experience expands. You begin to see more. You begin to notice details you would have ignored. You begin to engage with life as it is, not as you imagined it. And in that engagement, something unexpected happens. You find moments of peace in places you did not expect. You find clarity in situations that did not go as planned. You find meaning in outcomes you would have rejected before. This is the quiet power of openness. It allows you to receive what life offers, instead of resisting what it is not. There is also a freedom in not needing things to go a certain way, because the moment you release that need, the pressure drops. You are no longer waiting for a specific result to feel okay. You are no longer holding your breath until something happens. You are no longer tied to a future moment. You are here, present, engaged. And this presence brings a different kind of peace. A peace that is not dependent on outcomes. A peace that exists within the experience itself. You begin to see that peace was never in the future. It was in your relationship with the present, and attachment was pulling you away from it. There is also a shift in how you respond to uncertainty. When you are attached, uncertainty feels threatening because it means the outcome is not guaranteed. Because it means things could go differently than you expect. But when you are open, uncertainty feels different. It feels like space, like possibility, like something that can unfold in many directions. And this changes your emotional response. Instead of tightening, you soften. Instead of resisting, you allow. Instead of fearing what might happen, you become curious about it. And this curiosity creates a sense of ease. Because you are no longer trying to control the future, you are allowing it to reveal itself. There is also something deeper that begins to shift. Your sense of identity. When you are attached to outcomes, your identity becomes tied to them. You begin to see success and failure as reflections of who you are. You begin to feel validated when things go your way and diminished when they do not. But when you release that attachment, something changes. Your identity becomes less dependent on results. You begin to see yourself not as the outcome, but as the one experiencing it. And this creates stability, because your sense of self is no longer fluctuating with every change. It remains steady, even when things do not go as planned. This steadiness allows you to move through life with more ease. You can act without fear of losing yourself. You can engage without needing to control. You can experience without clinging. And in that movement, there is freedom. Not the freedom of having everything go your way, but the freedom of not needing it to. There will still be moments where attachment appears, moments where the mind fixes itself to an outcome, Moments where you feel the pull to control, but now you can see it. You can notice the tightening. You can feel the expectation forming, and instead of following it, you pause. You create space. You allow the expectation to be there without letting it take over. And in that space, something softens. The grip loosens. The pressure fades. Because you are no longer feeding the attachment. You are observing it, and observation brings clarity. You begin to see that the outcome you are holding on to is not the only possibility. You begin to see that life is offering more than you are allowing yourself to receive, and this realization opens something inside you, a sense of trust. Not in a specific result, but in the unfolding of experience itself. You begin to trust that even if things do not go as planned, you will be okay. That even if outcomes shift, there is still something to learn, something to experience, something to gain. And this trust replaces the need for control. It allows you to move forward without gripping tightly. It allows you to act without fear. It allows you to live without waiting. Because you are no longer holding your peace hostage to a future moment. You are allowing it to exist now, in this moment, as it is. And in that allowance, something becomes clear. The peace you were searching for was never in achieving the right outcome. It was in releasing the need for one. And when that need fades, what remains is something simple. A quiet openness, a gentle acceptance, a steady presence that moves with life instead of against it. And in that movement, there is a kind of peace that does not come and go, because it is not tied to what happens. It is rooted in how you allow it to happen. And this is where freedom deepens. Not in controlling outcomes, but in being open to experience. Not in forcing life to fit your expectations, but in allowing it to unfold, fully, naturally, without resistance. And in that openness, you discover something that control could never give you. A peace that does not depend on anything. A peace that was always here, waiting for you to stop holding on. And as that openness begins to grow, as you start to loosen your grip on specific outcomes, something even more fundamental begins to reveal itself. It is not only the attachment that creates tension, it is what lies beneath that attachment. A deeper discomfort that has always been there, quietly shaping your reactions, guiding your need for certainty, pushing you to hold on. And when you begin to notice it, you realize that the struggle is not really about outcomes at all. It is about the unknown. There is a quiet unease that appears the moment you cannot see what comes next. It does not always show itself clearly, but you can feel it. A subtle tightening in the body, a restless movement in the mind, a sense that something is incomplete, that something needs to be resolved before you can truly relax. This is the mind encountering uncertainty, and instead of allowing it, the mind resists. It tries to replace the unknown with answers. It tries to fill the gaps with predictions. It tries to create certainty where there is none, because uncertainty feels uncomfortable, not because it is dangerous, but because it is open. It has no clear shape, no fixed direction, no guarantee of outcome. And the mind prefers what is known. It prefers clarity, even if that clarity is imagined. So when faced with uncertainty, it reacts, it searches, it questions, it tries to figure things out. But this reaction is not neutral. It is driven by resistance, a refusal to sit with not knowing, a refusal to allow things to remain unresolved. And this refusal creates instability. Because now, instead of simply experiencing the moment, you are trying to escape it. You are trying to move away from uncertainty towards something that feels more solid. But that solidity is not real. It is constructed through thought, and thought is always moving. So the stability you are trying to create never lasts. You find one answer, and then another question appears. You reach one conclusion, and then doubt follows. You feel certain for a moment, and then uncertainty returns. And this creates a cycle, a constant movement between trying to know and realizing you do not. And this movement is what creates tension, because the mind is always trying to land somewhere that does not exist, a place of complete certainty, a place where everything is clear, a place where nothing is unknown. But life does not offer that place. It unfolds without guarantees. It moves without fixed outcomes. It presents moments without complete information. And when you resist this, you create friction. A friction between the nature of life and the demands of the mind. This friction is what you feel as anxiety, not always as a strong emotion, but as a background instability, a sense that something is unsettled, a feeling that you need to do something to fix it, but there is nothing to fix. Because uncertainty is not a problem. It is a condition of life. It has always been there, in every decision, in every interaction, and in every moment of change. But the mind treats it as something abnormal, something that needs to be eliminated. And this is where the struggle begins. Because you cannot eliminate uncertainty. You can only resist it or allow it. And resistance creates tension. Allowing creates space. There is a moment where this becomes clear. A moment where you notice that the discomfort you feel is not coming from uncertainty itself. It is coming from your reaction to it, from the need to know, from the effort to resolve, from the refusal to remain in the unknown. And in that moment, something shifts, because you begin to see that uncertainty is not what is disturbing you. It is your resistance to it. This realization opens a new possibility. The possibility of staying, of not rushing to answers, of not forcing clarity, of allowing the moment to be as it is, even if it is not fully understood. At first, this feels unfamiliar. The mind is used to movement, used to searching, used to trying to resolve. So when you stop, when you allow uncertainty to remain, there is a sense of unease, a feeling that you should be doing something, that you are missing something. But this feeling is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that the habit of resistance is still active, and as you stay with it, without reacting, something begins to change. The intensity of the discomfort starts to soften. The urgency begins to fade. The need to fix begins to loosen, because the mind is learning something new. That it does not need to escape uncertainty to be okay, that it can remain present even without answers, that it can experience the unknown without collapsing. And this learning creates stability, not the kind of stability that comes from knowing everything, but the kind that comes from not needing to, a stability that is rooted in presence, in awareness, in the ability to remain here regardless of what is known or unknown. This is a different kind of strength, a strength that does not rely on certainty, a strength that does not require control, a strength that allows life to unfold without constant interference. You begin to notice how much energy was being used to resist uncertainty, how much effort was going into trying to create clarity, how much tension was being held in the body and mind. And as that effort drops, something opens, a sense of ease, a quiet relaxation, a feeling that you no longer need to hold everything together, because you realize that nothing was falling apart. It was only your perception that something needed to be fixed. There is also a deeper trust that begins to form, not a trust that everything will go the way you want, but a trust that you can move through whatever arises, that you do not need to know everything in advance, that you can respond to life as it happens. This trust removes the pressure, because you are no longer trying to secure the future. You are allowing it to arrive, and this changes your relationship with time. You are no longer leaning forward, trying to see what comes next. You are here, in this moment, fully. And in that presence, uncertainty loses its weight. It becomes part of the experience, not something to escape. You begin to see it differently, not as a threat, but as openness, not as instability, but as possibility, not as something missing, but as something alive. And this shift transforms how you feel, because you are no longer resisting, you are allowing. There will still be moments where the mind reacts, moments where it tries to predict, to control, to resolve, but now you can see it, you can notice the movement, you can feel the tension. And instead of following it, you pause, you return to awareness. You allow the uncertainty to be there without trying to change it. And in that allowance, the resistance fades, not all at once, but gradually, until what remains is something simple, a quiet stability, a calm presence, a sense that you are okay, even without knowing what comes next. And this is where peace deepens, not because everything is certain, but because you are no longer fighting uncertainty. You are living with it, moving with it, allowing it. And in that allowance, you discover something that was always true. You do not need to know everything to be at peace. You do not need to control the unknown to feel safe. You only need to stop resisting what is already here. And when that resistance falls away, the instability disappears. Not because life has become predictable, but because you have become present, steady, open, at ease with what is. And in that ease, there is a quiet kind of freedom. A freedom that does not depend on certainty. A freedom that exists even in the unknown. A freedom that comes from no longer needing life to be anything other than what it is. And in that freedom, you finally find what you were searching for, not answers, but peace. And as you begin to rest more easily in the unknown, as you stop fighting uncertainty and allow life to unfold without forcing answers, another hidden weight slowly rises to the surface. It is not the fear of what is coming next, but the pull of what has already happened. The quiet need to understand, to explain, to complete what feels unfinished. And when you look closely, you realize that the mind is not only uncomfortable with uncertainty about the future, it is equally unsettled by anything unresolved in the past. There is a particular kind of discomfort that lingers long after an experience has ended. A conversation that did not go the way you expected. A relationship that ended without clear reasons. A moment where something changed, but no explanation followed. These situations do not simply pass. They remain in the mind, returning again and again, asking for something that was never given. This is the need for closure. It feels like a natural desire, a desire to understand what happened, to make sense of it, to bring a clear ending to something that feels open. The mind believes that if it can just find the right explanation, the discomfort will disappear. That if it can just understand why things happened the way they did, peace will return. But what often happens is the opposite. The search for closure keeps the experience alive. The mind replays the event, looking for details it might have missed. It analyzes every word, every action, every possible meaning. It creates theories, builds narratives, tries to connect pieces that may never fully connect. And with each attempt, the experience becomes more active, not less. The wound is not closing, it is being reopened, because the mind keeps returning to it. There is a hidden belief behind this process, the belief that understanding leads to healing, but understanding is not always available. Not every situation comes with clear answers. Not every person offers explanations. Not every experience can be fully understood in a logical way. And when you depend on understanding to find peace, you become stuck. You wait, you search, you revisit. And in that waiting, the emotional weight remains. There is also a deeper layer to this. The need for closure is often tied to the need for control. The mind wants to bring the experience to a clear conclusion. It wants to define what happened, to label it, to place it in a category that makes sense, because without that definition, the experience feels incomplete, and incompleteness creates discomfort. It feels like something is still open, still active, still unresolved. So the mind tries to close it. But closure is not something you can always create through thinking. It is not something that comes from finding the perfect explanation. It is something that comes from allowing the experience to be what it was, without needing it to be different. This is where the shift begins. You start to notice that the discomfort is not coming from the lack of answers. It is coming from the resistance to not having them. From the belief that something is missing. From the insistence that things should be clearer than they are. And in that insistence, the mind keeps the experience alive. There is a moment where this becomes visible. A moment where you realize that you have thought about the same situation many times and nothing has changed. The answers are not becoming clearer. The feeling is not dissolving. The repetition is not bringing relief. And in that moment, something opens. Because you begin to question the process itself. You begin to see that the mind is not resolving the experience. It is sustaining it. By returning to it again and again. By trying to fix something that is already over. And this realization creates space. Space to step back. Space to see the pattern. Space to stop feeding it. There is a different way of relating to unresolved experiences. A way that does not require closure in the way the mind imagines it. It begins with acceptance. Not acceptance of what happened as something you agree with or approve of, but acceptance of the fact that it happened, without adding a story, without needing to explain it fully, without requiring it to make sense. This acceptance is not passive. It is clear. It is direct. It is the recognition that the event is already complete, even if it does not feel that way. The mind may still see it as unfinished, but in reality, it has already ended, and the only thing keeping it active is the continued attention given to it. When you begin to withdraw that attention, something changes. The intensity starts to fade. The emotional charge begins to soften. The experience loses its grip. Not because you solved it, but because you stopped trying to. There is also a release that comes from letting go of the need to understand everything. A recognition that not every question needs an answer. That not every situation can be explained. That not every ending comes with clarity. And that this is not a flaw in life. It is part of its nature. Life does not always provide neat conclusions. It does not always tie things together in a way that satisfies the mind. And when you allow this, when you stop expecting every experience to be fully resolved, something relaxes. The pressure drops. The need to search fades. And in that fading, there is relief. There is also a shift in how you relate to the past. Instead of seeing it as something that needs to be fixed, you begin to see it as something that has already happened. Something that cannot be changed. Something that does not need to be revisited to be complete. And this changes your relationship with memory. You can remember without re-entering the experience. You can reflect without reopening the wound. You can acknowledge without attaching. And this creates distance, not emotional numbness, but clarity. A sense that the past no longer has the same hold over you, because you are no longer feeding it with the need for closure. There will still be moments where the mind returns. Moments where it tries to search again, to analyze again, to find something it believes is missing. But now you can see it. You can notice the pattern. You can feel the pull. And instead of following it, you pause. You allow the thought to pass. You return to the present, again and again. This is how the cycle breaks, not through force, but through awareness, through recognizing that the search for closure is not leading to peace, through allowing the experience to remain as it is, without needing it to be different. And in that allowance, something settles, a quiet stillness, a sense that nothing is missing, that nothing needs to be added or explained, that the moment is already complete. And in that completeness, there is peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from understanding everything, but the kind that comes from not needing to. A peace that is not dependent on answers. a peace that is not waiting for resolution, a peace that exists when you stop trying to close what is already finished. And as this becomes clearer, you begin to feel lighter, freer, less burdened by the past, because you are no longer carrying the weight of unanswered questions. You are no longer trying to complete what has already ended. You are allowing it to be. And in that allowing, something shifts deeply. You return to the present, to what is here, to what is alive, and the past begins to lose its hold, not because it was erased, but because you no longer need anything from it. And in that release, you discover something simple. Closure was never something you needed to find. It was something you needed to stop chasing. And when that chase ends, what remains is quiet, still, peaceful, complete. And as that quiet sense of completion begins to settle, as you stop chasing explanations and allow the past to rest where it belongs, another hidden layer of control slowly comes into view. It is not about needing answers anymore. It is about something heavier, something you have been carrying without even questioning it. A weight that feels like responsibility, but goes far beyond what is actually yours. And when you begin to see it clearly, you realize that much of your exhaustion was never about life itself, but about everything you believed you had to carry. There is a subtle habit that forms over time, one that feels noble on the surface. It feels like care, like maturity, like strength. You begin to take responsibility not only for your own actions, but for how others feel, how situations unfold, how outcomes are experienced by everyone involved. You start to believe that it is your role to hold things together, to keep everything stable, to make sure nothing falls apart. It begins in small ways. You notice someone is upset and you feel responsible for fixing it. You sense tension in a room and you try to ease it. You see a situation becoming complicated and you step in to manage it. At first, this seems helpful. It feels like you are being supportive. It feels like you are being reliable. It feels like you are doing the right thing. But slowly, this expands. You begin to take on more than what belongs to you. You start to feel responsible for other people's reactions. You start to carry the emotional weight of situations you did not create. You start to believe that if something goes wrong, you should have prevented it. And without realizing it, you begin to live in a state of over-responsibility, a state where you are constantly monitoring, adjusting, and trying to manage everything around you. This creates a quiet pressure, a sense that you always need to be aware, that you always need to be ready, that you cannot fully relax because something might require your attention, and this pressure does not leave easily because it feels justified. It feels like you are being a good person. It feels like you are doing what needs to be done. But beneath that feeling, there is something else, a lack of boundaries, a confusion between what is yours and what is not. You begin to treat other people's emotions as if they are your responsibility. You begin to treat outcomes as if they are entirely in your control. You begin to carry things that were never yours to hold, and this creates exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from physical effort, but the kind that builds slowly in the background. It shows up as mental fatigue, a constant sense of being drained, a feeling that you are always doing something, even when you are not, because your mind is always engaged, always thinking about what needs to be fixed, what needs to be managed, what needs to be handled. This is control through over-responsibility, and it is one of the most hidden forms of control, because it does not look like control, it looks like care. But true care does not require you to carry everything. It does not require you to lose yourself in the process of helping others. It does not require you to take ownership of things that are not yours. There is a difference between supporting and carrying. Supporting allows space. Carrying takes it away. When you support someone, you are present with them. You listen, you respond, you offer what you can, but you do not take on their experience as your own. When you carry someone, you absorb their emotions. You feel responsible for their state. You try to fix what they are going through. and in doing so, you blur the line between you and them. This blurring creates confusion, because now you are not only dealing with your own inner world, you are dealing with theirs as well, and this doubles the weight, sometimes even more. There is also a fear behind this pattern, the fear that if you do not take responsibility, something will go wrong. That if you do not step in, things will fall apart. That if you do not manage the situation, it will become worse. And this fear keeps the habit alive. It tells you that you must stay involved, that you must stay alert, that you must keep everything under control. But this is not true, because life is not something you can fully manage. People are not something you can control. Situations are not something you can guarantee. And the more you try, the more tension you create. There is a moment where this becomes visible, a moment where you feel overwhelmed and you realize that much of what you are carrying is not yours, that you have taken on responsibilities that were never given to you, that you have stepped into roles that were never yours to fill. And in that moment, something begins to shift, because you start to question the assumption that you need to carry everything. You begin to ask, what is actually mine to hold, and what is not? This question creates clarity. You begin to see that your responsibility is limited. It is not everything. It is not everyone. It is not every outcome. Your responsibility is your intention, your actions, your presence. Beyond that, there is a boundary, and that boundary matters. Because without it, you lose balance, you lose clarity, you lose yourself. Learning to release over-responsibility does not mean you stop caring. It means you care in a different way. A way that does not consume you, a way that does not drain you, a way that allows both you and others to exist without being controlled. You begin to allow others to have their own experiences, their own emotions, their own reactions, without needing to step in and change them. You begin to trust that people can handle their own lives, that situations can unfold without your constant involvement, that not everything depends on you, and this trust brings relief, because you are no longer holding everything together. You are allowing things to be. There will still be moments where the mind tries to take on more, moments where it feels like you should do something, fix something, carry something, but now you can see it, you can feel the weight before it fully settles. You can notice the urge to take responsibility beyond what is yours, and instead of following it, you pause. You ask yourself, is this mine to carry? And if it is not, you let it go. Not with force, not with resistance, but with understanding, with clarity, with a quiet decision to return to your own space. And in that return, something changes. The heaviness begins to lift, the pressure begins to fade, the constant engagement begins to settle. Because you are no longer extending yourself beyond your limits, you are grounded, centered, present within your own experience. And this creates a different kind of peace. A peace that is not built on managing everything, but on knowing what is yours and what is not. A peace that allows you to care without being consumed, to support without losing yourself, to be present without carrying unnecessary weight. This is where balance begins. Not by doing more, but by holding less. Not by controlling more, but by releasing what was never yours. And as this becomes clearer, you begin to feel lighter, more at ease, less burdened, because you are no longer living as if everything depends on you. You are living with an understanding that allows space. Space for yourself, space for others, space for life to move without constant interference. And in that space, something simple becomes clear. You were never meant to carry everything. You were only meant to carry what is yours, nothing more, nothing less. And in that realization, there is a quiet freedom, a freedom from the weight of over-responsibility, a freedom from the need to control through carrying, a freedom that allows you to finally rest, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer trying to hold the world together. You are allowing it to be. And in that allowance, there is peace. And as that weight begins to fall away, as you finally stop carrying what was never yours, something else quietly appears in its place. A space you are not used to, a stillness that feels unfamiliar. And instead of immediately bringing peace, it can feel unsettling, almost uncomfortable. Because for a mind that has been trained to control, fix and manage, stillness does not feel safe. It feels like something is missing. There is a quiet moment where nothing is happening, and yet something inside you becomes alert, a subtle urge to do something, to think something, to check something. It is not always loud, but it is persistent, a feeling that you should not just sit here, that you should be moving, planning, adjusting, interfering in some way. And this feeling reveals something important. The mind has become used to activity, not just physical activity, but mental movement. It has learned to stay engaged, to stay ahead, to stay involved. And when that movement stops, it does not recognize the stillness as peace. It recognizes it as danger, because stillness removes the illusion of control. When you are not doing anything, not thinking ahead, not managing outcomes, there is nothing for the mind to hold on to. There is no sense of directing what comes next. There is no feeling of being in charge. And for a conditioned mind, this feels uncomfortable. It feels like losing control. And the mind reacts to that. It begins to create thoughts. Small at first, then more. It brings up things you need to do, things you should think about, problems you might have missed, conversations you need to revisit, plans you should make. Not because these things are urgent, but because they restore movement. They give the mind something to hold on to again. They create the feeling of control, and so the cycle continues. Stillness appears. The mind becomes uncomfortable. Thoughts arise, movement returns, and the stillness disappears. This is the fear of letting life unfold without interference. It is not always obvious. It does not always show up as fear in a clear way. But it is there, hidden beneath the need to stay engaged, the need to do something, the need to interfere. Because without interference, there is openness, and openness feels uncertain. There is no clear direction, no defined outcome, no immediate sense of control. And the mind has been trained to avoid this. It has been conditioned to believe that if it is not actively involved, something might go wrong. That if it lets go, it will miss something. That if it remains still, it is not being responsible. But this belief creates tension because it keeps the mind in constant motion. It prevents rest. It prevents ease. It prevents the natural unfolding of life. There is also something deeper beneath this pattern, a fear of what might arise in stillness, because when the mind is quiet, when there is no distraction, no planning, no controlling, things begin to surface. Feelings that were ignored, thoughts that were pushed aside, sensations that were never fully felt. And this can feel uncomfortable. So the mind avoids stillness, not because stillness is dangerous, but because it reveals what has been hidden. It brings you closer to your direct experience, without filters, without distraction, without control. And this closeness can feel intense at first, because you are no longer escaping, you are present, fully. And presence has a depth that the mind is not always used to, but this depth is not something to fear, it is something to understand. Because what arises in stillness is not new, it has always been there. It was simply covered by activity, by thinking, by controlling. And when that covering is removed, it becomes visible. This is where the shift begins, not by forcing stillness, but by allowing it, by noticing the urge to move, by seeing the discomfort, by feeling the pull to interfere, and choosing not to follow it. Not as a struggle, but as an observation. You begin to sit with the stillness, even when it feels unfamiliar, even when the mind tries to pull you away. You remain, you stay, you allow. And something begins to change. The discomfort starts to soften. The urge to interfere begins to weaken. The mind slowly learns that stillness is not a threat, that nothing is missing, that nothing needs to be added. There is also a quiet realization that emerges. that life does not need your constant interference to function, that things are unfolding whether you control them or not, that much of what you were trying to manage was already moving on its own. This realization brings relief because it removes the pressure. You no longer feel like you must be involved in everything. You no longer feel like you must guide every moment. You begin to trust the unfolding, not blindly but naturally. You begin to see that life has its own movement, its own rhythm, its own intelligence, and that your role is not to control it, but to participate in it, to respond when needed, to act when appropriate, but not to interfere constantly. This creates space, a space where you can rest, where you can be without needing to do, where you can experience life without managing it. And in that space, something opens, a sense of ease, a quiet calm, a feeling that you are not required to hold everything together. Because everything is already moving. There will still be moments where the mind resists, moments where stillness feels uncomfortable again, moments where the urge to interfere returns. But now you can see it. You can notice the pattern. You can feel the movement beginning. And instead of following it, you pause. You stay. You allow the stillness to remain. And in doing so, you weaken the habit. Not by fighting it, but by not feeding it. Over time, this changes your relationship with stillness. It no longer feels empty. It no longer feels dangerous. It begins to feel natural, like something you can return to, like a place that does not require effort, like a state that is always available. You begin to notice moments when nothing is happening, and instead of feeling restless, you feel calm. Moments where there is no need to think, no need to plan, no need to control. And in those moments, there is peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being interfered with. This is the quiet freedom of letting life unfold, not as something you force, but as something you allow. A freedom from constant engagement. A freedom from unnecessary movement. A freedom from the belief that you must always be doing something to be okay. And as this understanding deepens, you begin to feel something you may not have felt before, a comfort in stillness, a trust in the unfolding, a sense that you can rest even when nothing is being controlled, because you see clearly now. Stillness is not the absence of life, it is the absence of interference. And in that absence, life reveals itself more clearly, more naturally, more fully. And you realize something simple, yet profound. You were never meant to control every moment. You were meant to experience it. And the moment you stop interfering, the moment you allow life to move as it is, something shifts. The tension dissolves, the fear fades. And what remains is something steady, something quiet, something deeply peaceful, not created, not forced, but always there, beneath the need to control, waiting for you to stop and simply be. And as that stillness becomes more familiar, as you begin to trust the unfolding without constantly interfering, something else quietly steps forward. It does not look like fear at first. It feels like responsibility, like urgency, like something that must be handled right now. But when you look closer, you begin to notice a pattern. A need to fix, to resolve, to close every open loop as quickly as possible. And in that moment, you start to see how even this urgency has been pulling you away from peace. There is a pressure that arises the moment something feels incomplete, a conversation that feels off, a problem that appears, a feeling that does not sit right. Instead of allowing it to be there, the mind reacts. It moves quickly. It searches for a solution. It tries to fix the situation before it fully understands it. This movement feels necessary. It feels like you are taking action. It feels like you are being effective, but beneath it, there is something else, a discomfort with leaving things unresolved, a resistance to letting something remain open, a belief that everything must be fixed immediately. And this belief creates urgency. Not a calm, clear movement toward resolution, but a rushed reaction driven by tension. You begin to notice it in small ways. A message that is not replied to quickly enough creates unease. A misunderstanding pushes you to explain yourself right away. An uncomfortable feeling leads you to search for a way to remove it instantly. The mind does not want to wait. It does not want to sit with uncertainty. It does not want to allow things to unfold naturally. It wants resolution now. And this urgency creates pressure. Because it removes space, it removes the time needed for clarity to arise. It pushes you into action before understanding is complete. And in that rush, something is lost. The ability to see clearly, the ability to respond thoughtfully, the ability to remain grounded. Instead, you react. You move quickly, trying to fix what feels uncomfortable. But this quick movement is often driven by emotion, not clarity. It is driven by the need to escape discomfort, not by a clear understanding of what is needed. And this leads to more complications, because actions taken in urgency often create new problems. You say things you did not fully mean. You make decisions without seeing the full picture. You try to resolve something that needed time, not force. And this creates a cycle. A problem appears. You rush to fix it. The fix creates more tension. You try to fix that tension. And the cycle continues. There is also something deeper behind this compulsion. A belief that discomfort should not exist. That if something feels off, it must be corrected immediately. That if something is uncertain, it must be resolved. But this belief creates instability, because life is not always smooth. There are moments of confusion, moments of discomfort, moments where things are not clear. And these moments are not problems. They are part of the process. They are spaces where understanding develops, where emotions settle, where clarity forms. But when you rush to fix them, you interrupt that process. You do not allow things to settle. You do not allow space for clarity to emerge. You replace patience with urgency, and urgency clouds perception. There is a difference between action and reaction. Action comes from clarity. It is steady. It is grounded. It does not feel rushed. Reaction comes from discomfort. It is quick. It is pressured. It is driven by the need to escape. And the compulsion to fix everything immediately is a form of reaction. It is not about what is actually needed. It is about what feels uncomfortable. And this creates a disconnect because you are not responding to reality as it is. You are responding to your discomfort with it. This is why urgency destroys clarity. Because clarity requires space. It requires time. It requires the ability to observe without immediately acting. But urgency removes that space. It pushes you to move before seeing, to act before understanding, to fix before fully feeling. And in doing so, it creates more confusion. There is a moment where this becomes clear. A moment where you realize that rushing has not brought you peace, that fixing things quickly has not made them better, that the constant need to resolve everything has only created more tension. And in that moment, something shifts, because you begin to question the urgency itself. You begin to ask, does this really need to be fixed right now? And often, the answer is no. What is needed is not immediate action. It is presence. It is patience. It is the willingness to allow the situation to unfold. This does not mean you avoid action. It means you do not rush into it. You allow space for clarity to arise. You allow time for emotions to settle. You allow the moment to reveal what is actually needed. And this changes your relationship with problems. They no longer feel like emergencies. They become experiences. Things that can be observed, understood, and responded to when the time is right. There is also a quiet strength in this. The ability to pause, to not react immediately, to remain present even when something feels uncomfortable. This strength does not come from controlling the situation. It comes from not being controlled by it, from not being pulled into urgency, from not being driven by the need to fix. You begin to notice the impulse as it arises, the urge to act quickly, the pressure to resolve, the discomfort of leaving something open, and instead of following it, you pause, you breathe, you allow the moment to be as it is, and in that pause, something changes. The intensity softens, the urgency fades, the mind becomes clearer, and from that clarity, action can arise naturally, not forced, not rushed, but appropriate. There is also a deeper trust that begins to form, a trust that not everything needs to be fixed immediately, that some things resolve on their own, that some situations require time, not intervention, that not every discomfort is a problem to solve. This trust reduces pressure because you are no longer trying to control every moment. You are allowing life to move, and this creates ease, a sense that you do not need to be constantly engaged, that you do not need to fix everything, that you can step back without things falling apart. There will still be moments where urgency returns, moments where the mind feels the need to act, to fix, to resolve, but now you can see it. You can feel the difference between clarity and compulsion. You can recognize when action is needed and when it is not. And this recognition allows you to choose, not from pressure, but from awareness. Over time, this changes everything. You become more patient, not because you are forcing yourself to wait, but because you no longer feel the need to rush. You become more clear, not because you are thinking more, but because you are allowing space for understanding to arise. You become more at ease, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer trying to fix everything. And in that ease, something settles. A quiet calm, a steady presence, a sense that things can unfold without your constant intervention. And in that unfolding, you begin to see something clearly. Not everything needs to be fixed. Not everything needs to be resolved right away. Not everything is a problem. Some things are simply part of the flow, and when you stop rushing to change them, when you allow them to move naturally, something shifts. The tension dissolves, the pressure fades, and what remains is something simple, a quiet clarity, a steady patience, a deep sense of peace that comes not from fixing everything, but from no longer needing to. And in that realization, you begin to feel lighter, freer, less driven by urgency, more grounded in presence, because you are no longer chasing resolution. You are allowing understanding, and in that allowance, life becomes clearer, not because it is controlled, but because it is seen, as it is, unrushed, unforced, unfolding. And in that unfolding, there is peace. And as that urgency begins to loosen, as you stop rushing to fix every moment and allow life to move at its own pace, something even more personal comes into view. It is not just situations you try to control, it is connection itself. The way you hold on to people, the way you try to keep love stable, the way you quietly shape your behavior to secure closeness. And when you begin to see this clearly, you realize that the deepest tension is not in what happens around you, but in how you try to hold on to those you care about. There is a quiet desire that lives inside every relationship, a desire to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel that the connection will remain. This desire is natural, it is part of being human. But when it meets uncertainty, when you cannot fully predict how someone feels or how they will act, something shifts. The mind begins to move toward control, not in obvious ways, but in subtle adjustments. You start to think more carefully about what you say. You begin to hold back certain parts of yourself. You try to present yourself in a way that will be accepted. You adjust your behavior to avoid conflict or rejection. At first, this feels like care. It feels like you are protecting the relationship. It feels like you are doing what is necessary to keep things stable. But beneath this, something else is happening. You are slowly moving away from authenticity. Because instead of being as you are becoming what you think is needed. You begin to shape yourself around the relationship. And in doing so, you lose something, the natural expression of who you are. There is also a deeper belief driving this behavior, the belief that love can be secured, That if you act the right way, say the right things, avoid the wrong moves, you can make the relationship stable, that you can prevent distance, that you can control how the other person feels. But this belief creates pressure, because now the relationship is something you must manage, something you must maintain through constant adjustment, something you must protect through control. And this creates tension, not only in your actions, but in your mind. You begin to think more, to analyze more, to monitor more. You watch for signs, you interpret small changes. You try to stay ahead of potential problems, and this keeps you in a state of alertness, a state where you are not fully relaxed, because part of you is always checking, always adjusting, always trying to keep the connection stable. But relationships are not stable in that way. They are alive. They move, they change, they grow in ways that cannot be fully controlled, and when you try to fix them into a certain form, you create resistance, a resistance that shows up as tension in the connection, because the other person can feel it. They can feel the subtle pressure, the unspoken expectations, the need for things to be a certain way, and this affects the dynamic, because instead of two people meeting naturally, there is a layer of control. A layer that tries to guide, to shape, to secure. And this layer creates distance, even if everything looks fine on the surface. There is also something else that happens when you try to control love. You begin to lose trust, not trust in the other person, but trust in the connection itself. You start to feel that if you do not manage things, they might fall apart. That if you relax, something might go wrong. That if you stop adjusting, the relationship might change. And this creates a constant effort, a feeling that you must stay involved at all times, that you cannot fully let go, that you must keep things under control. But this effort is exhausting, because it is based on something that cannot be secured. Love is not something you can control. It is something that exists freely. It arises, it grows, it changes. And when you try to hold it too tightly, you restrict it. You limit its natural movement. You turn it into something fragile, because it now depends on control to survive. There is a moment where this becomes clear, a moment where you realize that all the effort you have put into managing the relationship has not brought ease. That despite trying to do everything right, there is still tension, still uncertainty, still a sense that something is not fully settled. And in that moment, something opens, because you begin to see that control is not creating security, it is creating pressure. And pressure does not sustain connection, it weakens it. This realization brings a shift. You begin to question the need to control. You begin to ask, what if the relationship does not need to be managed in this way? What if it can exist without constant adjustment? What if it can unfold naturally? And this question creates space. Space for authenticity. Space for honesty. Space for presence. You begin to allow yourself to be as you are. Not as you think you should be. Not as you believe is required. But as you are in this moment. And this changes the connection, because authenticity brings something that control cannot. It brings realness. A sense that what is happening is not being forced. That what is being expressed is true. And this allows the relationship to breathe, to move, to evolve. There is also a deeper trust that begins to form, a trust that love does not need to be controlled to exist. That connection does not need to be managed to continue, that if something is real, it will move in its own way. And this trust removes pressure, because you are no longer trying to secure the relationship. You are allowing it. There will still be moments where the mind tries to step in, moments where it wants to adjust, to control, to fix. But now you can see it. You can feel the tension that comes with it. You can notice the shift away from authenticity. And instead of following it, you pause. You return to yourself. You allow the moment to unfold without interference. And in that allowance, something changes. The connection becomes lighter, more natural, more fluid. Because it is no longer being shaped by control. it is being experienced as it is. There is also a freedom that comes with this, a freedom from needing the relationship to be a certain way, a freedom from constantly managing how you are seen, a freedom from the fear that things must be controlled to last. This freedom allows you to engage fully, to be present, to express without holding back, without adjusting, without controlling. And in that presence, something deeper emerges, a connection that is not built on effort, but on openness. A connection that does not need to be secured, but simply experienced. And this changes how you feel, because you are no longer carrying the weight of maintaining everything. You are allowing the relationship to move, to grow, to change, as it naturally does. There is also a clarity that begins to form. You begin to see that control was never creating safety. It was creating distance, distance from yourself, distance from the other person, distance from the real experience of connection. And when that control drops, that distance fades. You come closer, not through effort, but through presence, through authenticity, through allowing. And in that closeness, there is something real, something that cannot be forced, something that cannot be controlled, something that can only exist when you stop trying to shape it. And that is where peace enters the relationship. Not as a result of control, but as a result of letting go of the need to secure, letting go of the need to manage, letting go of the need to make things a certain way, and allowing what is real to be enough. And in that allowance, you begin to feel something different, a sense of ease, a sense of trust, a sense that you can be fully yourself without needing to control how things unfold. Because you see clearly now, love does not need control to exist. It needs space, it needs honesty, it needs presence. And when you give it that, it moves freely, naturally, without force, without pressure, without fear. And in that freedom, there is peace. Not because everything is certain, but because nothing is being held too tightly. And in that lightness, you finally experience connection as it is meant to be. Uncontrolled, authentic, alive, and deeply at peace. And as that grip on relationships begins to soften, as you stop trying to control connection and allow it to move naturally, another pattern quietly reveals itself. It is not only about people or outcomes anymore, it is about what the mind does when it does not feel certain. A habit so quick, so automatic, that you rarely notice it happening. The way the mind jumps ahead, not just to the future, but to the worst version of it. And once you see this clearly, you begin to understand how control is still operating in the background. There is a sudden shift that happens inside the mind when something feels unclear. A pause, a gap, a moment where you do not know what will happen next. And instead of staying with that openness, the mind moves quickly. It fills the space. It creates a scenario. But not just any scenario. It goes to what could go wrong. Not in a dramatic way at first, but in small, subtle ways. A thought appears that something might not work out. Then another thought follows, adding detail. Then another, building a sequence. And before you notice, the mind has created a full picture of a future that has not happened. A conversation turns into conflict. A delay turns into rejection. A small mistake turns into failure. And all of this happens within seconds. It feels real. Not because it is happening, but because the mind has filled it with detail. This is the mind creating worst-case scenarios. It believes it is protecting you. It believes that by imagining what could go wrong, it can prepare you, that it can help you avoid pain, that it can keep you safe. But what it is actually doing is something very different. It is creating tension. Because the body does not always distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. When the mind creates a negative scenario, the body responds. You feel it, a tightening in the chest, a subtle unease, a shift in your breathing, and suddenly you are reacting to something that is not happening. This is where control hides. The mind tries to anticipate problems so it can neutralize them before they occur. It tries to stay ahead of life, to predict what might go wrong and prepare for it. But this preparation never ends, because once one scenario is imagined, another follows, and another, and another. There is no final point where the mind says this is enough, because the future is open. And openness allows endless possibilities. So the mind keeps searching, it keeps scanning, it keeps building, and this creates a loop, a constant movement between imagining and reacting. You begin to feel like something is wrong, even when nothing is happening. You begin to feel uneasy, even in calm moments. You begin to live as if you are always on the edge of something going wrong. This is not reality. This is projection. But projection feels real when it is repeated enough. There is also a deeper reason why the mind does this. It is trying to create certainty. It believes that if it can identify all possible threats, it can avoid them. That if it can think through every negative outcome, it will be prepared. But this belief is flawed, because thinking about something does not give you control over it. It only gives you the illusion of control. You feel like you are doing something. You feel like you are preparing. But in reality, you are just thinking. And thinking does not change what will happen. It only changes how you feel in the present. And when the thinking is focused on negative possibilities, it creates a constant sense of danger, even when you are safe. There is a moment where this becomes clear, a moment where you notice that the scenarios you feared did not happen, that the things you imagined were not real, that the tension you felt was based on something that never existed. And in that moment, something shifts, because you begin to see that the mind is not predicting the future. It is creating stories. Stories that feel real, but are not. Stories that influence your emotions, but are not based on actual events. And this realization creates space. Space between you and the thought. You begin to notice when the mind starts building a scenario. You begin to see the pattern, the way it moves quickly from uncertainty to assumption, from assumption to conclusion, from conclusion to emotional reaction, and instead of following it, you pause. You recognize that this is not reality. It is imagination. And this recognition weakens the pattern, because you are no longer fully identified with the thought. You are observing it. And observation creates distance. There is also a shift in how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of trying to fill it with imagined outcomes, you allow it to remain open. You do not rush to create a story. You do not jump to conclusions. You stay with what is actually happening. And this changes your experience, because you are no longer reacting to imagined threats. You are responding to real situations. And this brings calm, a sense of stability, a feeling that you are grounded in what is real, not what is imagined. There will still be moments where the mind tries to create scenarios, moments where it pulls you into possible futures. But now you can see it. You can feel the shift. You can notice when you are moving away from the present. And instead of continuing, you return. You come back to what is here, to what is actually happening. And in that return, the imagined scenarios lose their power, because they are not being fed, they are not being followed, they are simply passing through. This is where control begins to dissolve, not because you forced it, but because you stopped participating in it. You stopped trying to manage the future through imagination. You stopped trying to neutralize threats that do not exist. You allowed the mind to settle, and in that settling, something becomes clear. You do not need to anticipate every possible problem to be safe. You do not need to imagine worst-case scenarios to be prepared. You only need to be present, to respond when something actually happens, not before. There is also a deeper trust that begins to form, a trust that you can handle situations as they arise, that you do not need to prepare for everything in advance, that you do not need to live in a constant state of alertness. This trust removes pressure, because you are no longer trying to control what has not happened. You are allowing life to unfold, and responding to it as it does. This creates ease, a quiet sense of relaxation, a feeling that you are not constantly bracing for impact, because you are no longer living in imagined futures. You are here, in this moment, where things are as they are. There is also a clarity that emerges. You begin to see that the mind was never protecting you. It was exhausting you. It was creating tension where there was none. It was turning neutral moments into stressful ones. And when this becomes clear, the habit begins to lose its hold. Not because you stopped thinking, but because you stopped believing every thought. You stopped following every scenario. You stopped reacting to every possibility. And in that stopping, something opens, a sense of calm, a feeling of groundedness, a presence that is not shaken by imagined outcomes. And in that presence, there is peace. Not because the future is certain, but because you are no longer trying to control it. You are allowing it to come, as it will, and when it arrives, you will meet it. Not with fear, not with tension, but with clarity, with awareness, with a steady presence that does not depend on what might happen. And in that steadiness, you find something you could never find in anticipation. A peace that exists now, not in the future, not in imagined outcomes, but here, in what is real, unchanged by what could be, unaffected by what might happen, simply present, simply aware, simply at peace. And as that grip on imagined futures begins to loosen, as you stop chasing every possible outcome and return to what is real, something even deeper begins to surface. It is no longer just about thoughts or habits, it is about who you believe yourself to be. Because after holding on for so long, after trying to manage everything, after building your sense of safety around control, it no longer feels like something you do. It feels like something you are. There is a quiet identity that forms over time. It does not appear all at once, but slowly, through repetition, through the constant need to stay ahead, to manage, to keep things together. You begin to see yourself as the one who handles things, the one who stays in control, the one who does not let life slip out of place. At first, this feels strong. It feels like discipline. It feels like awareness. It feels like responsibility. And others may even recognize you for it. They may say you are reliable. They may say you are composed. They may say you have everything together. And this reinforces the identity, because now it is not just something you do. It is something you are known for, something you take pride in, something you protect. But beneath this identity, there is something else, a quiet tension, a constant effort, a feeling that you must maintain this image, because if you let go, something might change. And this is where control becomes personal. It is no longer about managing situations. It is about maintaining who you believe yourself to be. You begin to feel that if you are not in control, you are not yourself. That if things become uncertain, you are losing something. That if you stop managing everything, you might fall apart. And this creates fear. Not the fear of what will happen, but the fear of who you will be without control. Because the identity has been built around it. You have learned to associate control with stability, with strength, with safety. So letting go does not feel like release. It feels like loss, like stepping into something unfamiliar, like leaving behind something that has defined you. But this identity is not as solid as it seems. It is constructed, built from habits, reinforced by repetition, shaped by past experiences. It is not who you truly are. It is a pattern. And like all patterns, it can be seen, it can be understood, it can be released. There is a moment where this becomes clear. A moment where you notice that the effort to stay in control is not bringing ease, that the identity you are holding on to is not giving you peace, that the constant need to manage is creating pressure, not freedom. And in that moment, something begins to shift, because you start to question the identity itself. You begin to ask, who am I without this? And this question creates space. At first, that space can feel uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar, because the mind does not know how to define itself without control. But within that discomfort, there is also possibility. A possibility to see beyond the identity, to experience yourself without the constant need to manage, to discover a way of being that is not based on control. There is also something else that becomes visible. The identity of being in control is not as stable as it appears. It requires constant effort, constant attention, constant reinforcement, because the moment you stop, it begins to fade, and this shows you something important. If it needs to be maintained, it is not your true nature. Your true nature does not require effort. It does not need to be held together. It does not depend on controlling anything. It is simply present, aware, unchanging beneath all movement. But the identity of control keeps you focused on the surface, on actions, on outcomes, on maintaining a certain image. And this pulls you away from that deeper presence. The more you identify with control, the more you feel the need to uphold it. And this creates tension, because life does not always allow you to stay in control. Things change, situations shift, people act in unexpected ways. And when this happens, the identity is challenged. You feel it, a sense of instability, a discomfort, a need to regain control quickly, because without it you feel exposed. But this exposure is not a weakness. It is a doorway into something more real, because when control drops, even for a moment, you begin to experience yourself differently, not as someone who must manage everything, but as someone who can simply be. You begin to feel the difference between effort and presence, between holding and allowing, between controlling and experiencing. And this difference is profound, because presence does not require identity. It does not require you to be a certain way. It allows you to exist without needing to define yourself. This can feel unfamiliar at first because the mind is used to structure, used to labels, used to defining who you are. But as you stay with it, something begins to settle. The need to define yourself through control starts to loosen. The pressure to maintain a certain image begins to fade, and in that fading, there is relief. A release from the constant effort of being someone, of upholding an identity, of staying in control. There is also a quiet realization that emerges. That letting go of control does not mean losing yourself. It means discovering what remains when control is not there. And what remains is not emptiness, it is presence. A simple awareness that does not need to prove anything. That does not need to manage anything. That does not need to be anything. It is just here. And in that presence, there is peace. Not because everything is controlled, but because nothing needs to be. There will still be moments where the identity tries to return. Moments where you feel the urge to step back into control, to regain that sense of structure, to define yourself again. But now you can see it. You can notice the pattern. You can feel the pull. And instead of following it, you pause. You allow yourself to remain without stepping back into the identity. You stay in the space, in the openness, and over time, this becomes more natural. The identity loses its hold, not because you rejected it, but because you no longer need it. You begin to move through life without needing to control everything, without needing to define yourself through your actions, without needing to maintain an image. And this creates freedom, a freedom that is not based on control, but on release, a freedom that allows you to be flexible, open, responsive, a freedom that does not depend on being a certain way. And in that freedom, something becomes clear. You were never the identity you built around control. You were the awareness beneath it, the presence that observed it, the stillness that remained even when everything was moving. And when you return to that, when you stop holding on to the identity, something shifts deeply. The tension dissolves, the pressure fades, the need to control begins to disappear. Not because you forced it, but because you no longer see yourself through it. And in that shift, there is peace. A peace that does not depend on who you are. A peace that exists beyond identity. A peace that is not created, but revealed when the need to control falls away. And in that revelation, you discover something simple. You do not need to be the one who controls everything. You can simply be present, aware, at ease. And in that ease, there is a quiet kind of freedom. A freedom from the need to define yourself. A freedom from the effort of control. A freedom that allows you to move through life without holding on to anything. And in that movement, you find something deeper than identity. You find peace. And as that identity begins to loosen, as you stop defining yourself through control and start resting more in simple awareness, something even more subtle begins to reveal itself. It is not as obvious as planning or overthinking, and it does not look like control at first. It feels softer, almost harmless. It feels like connection, like checking, like wanting to be sure. But when you look closely, you begin to notice that even this carries a quiet tension, a need to confirm, to be reassured, to know that everything is still okay. There is a small question that appears in the mind, often unnoticed. It sounds simple, it sounds reasonable, but it repeats, are they still okay with me? Did I do the right thing? Is everything fine? These questions do not come once. They return again and again, and each time they carry a subtle discomfort, a feeling that something is uncertain, something needs to be confirmed before you can relax. This is the beginning of seeking reassurance. It does not feel like control. It feels like clarity. It feels like you are just trying to understand. But beneath it, there is a deeper movement, a desire to stabilize how you feel by controlling what others say. You look for signs, a message, a tone, a reaction. You listen carefully, not just to hear, but to confirm, to make sure nothing has changed, to make sure everything is still safe. And for a moment, when reassurance is given, you feel relief. A soft release, a sense that things are okay again. But this relief does not last, because the uncertainty returns, and with it, the need to ask again, to check again, to confirm again. This creates a cycle, a quiet loop that keeps you dependent on external responses. You begin to feel that your sense of calm depends on what others say, that your stability depends on their reassurance. And this is where the hidden control appears, because you are no longer just experiencing the relationship. You are trying to secure it through constant confirmation. You are trying to manage how it feels by controlling the feedback you receive. And this creates tension, not always visible but present. A subtle need that sits beneath interactions, a pressure that asks for certainty again and again. There is also a deeper fear beneath this pattern, a fear of losing connection, a fear that something might change without you noticing, a fear that if you do not check, things might drift. And the mind responds by seeking reassurance, not once, but repeatedly, as if each confirmation can guarantee stability. But it cannot, because reassurance does not remove uncertainty. It only covers it for a moment, and the more you depend on it, the more sensitive you become to its absence. A delayed response feels heavier, a neutral tone feels uncertain, a lack of confirmation feels like something is wrong, and this increases anxiety, because now your mind is constantly scanning for signs, interpreting details, trying to read between the lines, and this keeps you engaged in a way that does not bring peace. It keeps you alert, always watching, always checking, always needing to know. There is also a cost to this, not just internally, but in the connection itself. Because when reassurance becomes constant, it begins to carry weight. The other person may feel the need behind it, the unspoken request to confirm again and again. And this can create pressure, a subtle tension that affects the natural flow of the relationship. Because connection begins to revolve around validation, not presence, around confirmation, not experience. And this shifts the dynamic from something open and natural to something managed and controlled. There is a moment where this becomes visible, a moment where you notice that even after receiving reassurance, the mind is not fully at rest, that the calm you felt fades quickly, that the need returns. And in that moment, something becomes clear. The reassurance is not solving the discomfort, it is maintaining it, because it reinforces the belief that you need external confirmation to feel okay. And this keeps the cycle alive. There is a different way of seeing this, a way that does not rely on constant reassurance. It begins with noticing the discomfort without immediately trying to resolve it. The moment the question appears, instead of seeking an answer, you pause. You feel the uncertainty. You stay with it, not trying to fix it, not trying to escape it, just allowing it to be there. At first, this feels uncomfortable because the mind is used to moving quickly, used to seeking answers, used to closing the gap. But as you stay, something begins to change. The intensity softens, the urgency fades, the need to ask begins to loosen. Because you are no longer feeding it, you are allowing the feeling without reinforcing the pattern. There is also a shift in trust, not trust in what others say, but trust in your own presence. A recognition that you do not need constant confirmation to be okay, that your sense of stability does not need to come from outside, that you can remain grounded even when things are not fully certain. This trust changes your experience, because you are no longer dependent. You are no longer waiting for reassurance to feel calm. You are finding that calm within yourself. And this creates freedom. A freedom from constant checking. A freedom from needing to confirm every detail. A freedom from the subtle pressure that comes with seeking validation. There will still be moments where the mind reaches out, moments where it wants to ask, to check, to confirm. But now you can see it, you can feel the movement, you can recognize the pattern, and instead of following it, you pause. You return to yourself. You allow the moment to unfold without interference. And in that space, something settles. The need becomes weaker. The pattern begins to fade, because it is no longer being reinforced. There is also a deeper understanding that emerges. That validation does not create security. It creates dependence, and true security does not come from outside. It comes from your ability to remain steady within yourself, to feel without needing immediate confirmation, to stay present without needing constant reassurance. This steadiness brings peace, a quiet calm that is not shaken by small uncertainties, a grounded presence that does not rely on external responses, a sense that you are okay, even when things are not fully confirmed. And in that sense, something shifts. You begin to relate differently. You listen without needing to interpret. You speak without needing to be validated. You connect without needing to secure the outcome, and this creates a different kind of connection, one that is lighter, more natural, more real, because it is not built on control, it is built on presence. There is also a quiet relief that comes with this, a release from the constant need to check, a release from the subtle anxiety of waiting for confirmation, a release from the pattern that kept you tied to external validation. And in that release, something opens, a sense of ease, a feeling that you can simply be, without needing to know everything, without needing to confirm everything, without needing to control how things are perceived. And this ease brings peace, not because everything is certain, but because you are no longer trying to make it so. You are allowing the uncertainty to exist, without turning it into a problem, without needing to resolve it immediately. And in that allowing, you discover something simple. You do not need constant reassurance to be okay. You do not need validation to feel stable. You do not need to control how others respond to feel secure. You only need to return to yourself, to your presence, to the awareness that is not shaken by temporary uncertainty. And when you do, something becomes clear. The peace you were seeking through reassurance was always within you. It was only hidden by the need to confirm. And when that need falls away, what remains is quiet, steady, unmoved. A presence that does not depend on anything outside. And in that presence, there is freedom. A freedom from subtle control, a freedom from constant seeking, a freedom that allows you to experience life as it is, without needing to secure it, without needing to hold it together, simply allowing, simply being. And in that being, you find peace. And as that need for reassurance begins to fade, as you stop depending on others to stabilize how you feel, something deeper comes into focus. It is not only the need to control what others say or how they respond. It is the way you relate to what is happening inside you. Because even when there is no one else involved, the mind continues the same pattern. It tries to manage, to adjust, to control what it feels. And when you begin to see this clearly, you realize that some of the strongest control is not directed outward, but inward. There is a moment when a feeling arises, and it is not comfortable. It does not feel right. It does not feel welcome. It could be sadness, anxiety, irritation, or something more subtle that you cannot easily name. The moment it appears, the mind reacts. It does not stay with it. It tries to change it. It begins to think about why it is there. It tries to fix it. It looks for ways to make it go away. This reaction feels automatic, almost immediate, as if the feeling itself is a problem, as if it should not be there. This is the inability to sit with unresolved emotions. Not because you lack strength, but because the mind has learned to avoid discomfort. It has learned that feelings must be managed, that they must be controlled, that they must be resolved as quickly as possible. But emotions do not work this way. They are not problems to solve. They are experiences that move. They rise, they stay for a while, and they pass. But when you interfere, when you try to control them, you interrupt this movement. You hold them in place. You keep them active. And this creates suffering. There is a subtle difference between feeling and controlling. When you feel, you allow the experience to be there. You do not add to it. You do not resist it. You do not try to change it. You simply let it move through you. But when you control, you engage with it. You think about it. You analyze it. You judge it. You try to remove it. And in doing so, you give it more energy. You keep it alive. There is also a deeper belief behind this pattern. The belief that certain emotions are not acceptable. That feeling anxious means something is wrong. That feeling sad means something needs to be fixed. That feeling uncomfortable means something must be changed. And this belief creates resistance, because now, every time a feeling arises, the mind reacts as if it is a threat, as if it needs to be handled, as if it cannot be allowed to exist on its own. This is where control becomes internal. You are no longer trying to control situations. You are trying to control your own experience, trying to shape how you feel, trying to maintain a certain emotional state. But this effort is exhausting, because emotions are not fixed. They change, they shift, they move in ways you cannot fully predict. And when you try to hold them in place or push them away, you create tension. There is a moment where this becomes visible, a moment where you notice that the more you try to get rid of a feeling, the stronger it becomes, that the more you think about it, the more present it feels, that the more you resist it, the longer it stays. And in that moment, something opens, because you begin to see that the problem is not the emotion itself. It is the resistance to it, the effort to control it, the need to make it go away. This realization creates space to try something different. Instead of reacting, you pause. You allow the feeling to be there, not as something you like, but as something you are not trying to change. You feel it in the body, without adding a story, without trying to understand it fully, without trying to fix it. At first, this feels unfamiliar. The mind wants to step in. It wants to explain, to analyze, to move away. But you stay. You remain present. And something begins to shift. the intensity of the feeling changes, not because you did something to it, but because you stopped interfering. You allowed it to move. And this movement is natural, because emotions are not permanent. They do not stay forever. They only appear to stay when they are being held in place, when they are being fed with attention, with resistance, with control. When you stop feeding them, they change, they soften, they pass. There is also a deeper understanding that begins to form, that you do not need to control your emotions to be okay, that you can experience discomfort without being overwhelmed by it, that you can feel without needing to fix. This understanding creates freedom, because you are no longer afraid of what you feel. You are no longer trying to avoid certain emotions. You are allowing the full range of experience. And this creates stability. Not the stability of always feeling good, but the stability of being able to remain present regardless of how you feel. This is a different kind of strength, a strength that does not come from control, but from acceptance, from allowing what is there without needing it to be different. There will still be moments where the mind reacts, moments where it tries to control the feeling again, to analyze, to fix, to escape. But now you can see it. You can notice the pattern. You can feel the urge to move away. And instead of following it, you stay. You return to the experience. You allow it to be. And in that allowing, the pattern begins to weaken, because it is no longer being reinforced. There is also a quiet trust that begins to grow, a trust that emotions can move on their own, that they do not need your control to pass, that they have their own rhythm, their own flow. And when you allow that flow, something changes. The relationship with your inner world becomes softer, less tense, less reactive. You begin to feel more at ease within yourself, not because you are controlling how you feel, but because you are allowing yourself to feel. And this creates peace, not the absence of emotion, but the absence of resistance. A peace that exists even when emotions arise, because you are not fighting them, you are not trying to change them. You are simply allowing them to be part of the experience. There is also a deeper connection that emerges, a connection to yourself. Because when you stop controlling your emotions, you begin to listen to them, not as problems, but as signals, as movements within you that do not need to be fixed, only understood. And this understanding is not intellectual, it is felt, direct, without words. And in that connection, something settles, a sense that you are no longer divided, no longer pushing parts of yourself away, no longer trying to maintain a certain state. You are whole, present, allowing everything to be as it is. And in that wholeness, there is peace, a peace that does not depend on feeling good all the time, a peace that remains even when discomfort arises. Because it is not built on control, it is built on acceptance, on the ability to sit with what is unresolved, without needing to resolve it immediately, without needing to change it, without needing to escape it. And as this ability grows, something becomes clear. You were never meant to control your emotions. You were meant to experience them, to let them move, to let them pass. And when you stop interfering, when you allow them to follow their natural course, something shifts. The tension dissolves, the struggle fades, and what remains is something simple, a quiet presence, a steady awareness, a peace that exists not because everything is resolved, but because nothing is being resisted. And in that peace, you finally rest. Not from controlling your experience, but from allowing it, fully, naturally, without fear, without force, just as it is. And as you begin to sit more gently with your emotions, as you stop trying to force them away and allow them to move on their own, something deeper starts to come into view. It is not just about what you feel now, it is about where these patterns first began. Because the need to control did not appear randomly, it was shaped slowly over time. And when you begin to look back without judgment, you start to see that what you call control today may have once been protection. There is a memory that does not always come as a clear image, but as a feeling a sense that things were not stable, that something was unpredictable, that the ground beneath you could shift without warning. It could have been loud or quiet, obvious or subtle, but it left an imprint, a time when you did not feel fully safe, a moment when things were out of your hands, an experience where you did not know what would happen next. And in that space, the mind learned something. It learned that unpredictability feels dangerous, that instability must be avoided, that not knowing is something to protect against. So it began to build a response. Control, not as a weakness, but as a way to cope, a way to create structure where there was none, a way to feel safe in an environment that did not always offer it. At that time, it made sense. It helped you navigate uncertainty. It gave you something to hold on to. It allowed you to feel a sense of direction. But over time, that response stayed. Even when the situation changed, even when the chaos was no longer present, the pattern remained, and what was once protection became rigidity. You begin to notice it in the way you approach life, a need for things to be predictable, a discomfort when plans change, a tension when outcomes are not clear. You may not connect it to the past, but it is there, a quiet conditioning that tells you to hold things tightly, to stay in control, to avoid anything that feels unstable. And this creates a certain way of living, a way that prioritizes certainty over flexibility, control over openness, structure over flow. At first, this feels safe because it reduces the feeling of unpredictability. But it also limits you, because life does not remain fixed. It moves, it changes, it unfolds in ways that cannot always be planned. And when you try to hold it in place, you create tension. There is also something else that happens. The past begins to shape how you see the present. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind stays alert. It looks for signs. It anticipates change. It prepares for instability. Not because it is happening, but because it once did. And this creates a constant background pressure, a feeling that things must be managed carefully, that you cannot fully relax, that you must stay in control to remain safe. But this safety is based on an old response, a response that no longer fits the present moment. There is a moment where this becomes clear, a moment where you notice that your reaction is stronger than the situation, that the need to control is not coming from what is happening now, but from something deeper. And in that moment, something begins to shift, because you start to see the connection. You begin to understand that your patterns were not random. They were learned. They were shaped by experience. And this understanding brings compassion, not judgment. You begin to see that the part of you that wants control is not trying to harm you. It is trying to protect you. It is responding in the only way it knows, based on what it learned. And this changes your relationship with it, because instead of fighting the need for control, you begin to understand it. You begin to see where it comes from. You begin to feel the underlying fear, not as something to eliminate, but as something to acknowledge. And this acknowledgement creates space. Space for something new to emerge. Because once you see that the pattern is based on the past, you can begin to question whether it is still needed. You can ask yourself, is this response serving me now? And often, the answer is no. Not because control is always wrong, but because the level of control you are using is based on a different context. A context that is no longer here. This realization allows something to soften. The rigidity begins to loosen. The need to hold everything tightly begins to ease, because you are no longer reacting to the present as if it were the past. You are seeing it clearly, as it is. And this clarity brings flexibility. You begin to allow things to change without immediately reacting. You begin to move with situations instead of trying to fix them in place. You begin to trust that not everything needs to be controlled to remain stable. There is also a deeper shift that happens. You start to feel safe in a different way. Not through control, but through presence. Not through rigidity, but through awareness. You begin to realize that safety does not come from preventing change. It comes from your ability to meet change as it happens, to remain grounded even when things move, to stay present even when outcomes are not certain. This kind of safety is not fragile. It does not depend on things staying the same. It exists within you. And as this understanding deepens, something begins to settle. The old patterns lose their intensity, not because you force them away, but because you no longer rely on them in the same way. You begin to respond differently, not from fear, but from clarity, not from past conditioning, but from present awareness, and this creates freedom. A freedom from the rigidity that once felt necessary, a freedom to experience life without holding it too tightly, a freedom to allow movement, change, and uncertainty without immediately reacting. There will still be moments where the old response appears, moments where the mind reaches for control, but now you can see it. You can recognize it as a learned pattern. You can feel the urge without being driven by it. And instead of tightening, you soften. You allow the moment to unfold. You stay present, and in that presence, the pattern begins to lose its power. Because it is no longer being reinforced, it is being seen. And seeing brings change. There is also a quiet healing that takes place, not by revisiting the past in a heavy way, but by releasing its hold on the present, by allowing yourself to respond differently now, by giving yourself the space that may not have been there before. And this healing is gentle. It does not require force. It does not require fixing everything. It simply requires awareness, a willingness to see what is happening, to understand where it comes from, and to allow something new to emerge. As this continues, you begin to feel lighter, less rigid, less tense, more open, because you are no longer carrying the need to control everything. You are allowing life to move as it does, naturally. And in that movement, something becomes clear. You were never meant to stay in control at all times. You were only trying to feel safe. And now you are learning that safety does not require control. It requires presence. It requires trust. It requires the ability to be here without holding on to the past. And in that realization, something shifts deeply. The need to control begins to fade. The rigidity dissolves. And what remains is something simple, a quiet flexibility, a steady awareness, a peace that is not built on holding things together, but on allowing them to be. And in that peace, you finally rest, not because everything is certain, but because you no longer need it to be. You are here, present, unburdened, and free. You spent so much of your life trying to hold everything together, trying to predict, control, fix, and understand every piece of your experience, believing that peace would finally come when everything made sense, when nothing was left uncertain, when nothing could go wrong. But now you see it clearly. The more you tried to control life, the further peace moved away from you. You saw how control disguised itself as protection, how it hid inside overthinking, inside relationships, inside your identity, inside your emotions, and even inside your past. You saw how it created tension where there was none, how it turned uncertainty into fear, how it made you carry what was never yours and chase answers that never brought relief. And now something has shifted. You are no longer trying to force life into a shape you can manage. You are no longer trying to control every outcome, every feeling, every reaction. You are allowing things to move as they are. You are trusting what unfolds. You are staying present even when things are unclear. And in that presence, you found something deeper than control. You found peace. Not the kind that depends on certainty, not the kind that waits for everything to be perfect, but the kind that exists right here when you stop interfering, when you stop resisting, when you stop trying to hold everything together. So, if you made it this far, type "I release control" in the comments, not for me but for you, as a quiet decision, as a reminder that you are choosing peace over pressure, presence over prediction, and trust over fear. And if this spoke to you, if something inside you shifted even slightly, Then subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is just the beginning. There is more clarity, more freedom, more peace waiting for you. Stay present, stay aware, and I will see you in the next one.